Chapter 891. Zhang Yan was sitting cross-legged in the guest pavilion of the Hanging Flute Island. There was an unfurled scroll floating in front of him. The scroll was about 7 feet wide. Spiritual chi was drifting around the scroll, and it was constantly emitting light. He raised his hand and gently brushed it away. It was as if a layer of gauze had been lifted, revealing the true appearance of the room. At this moment, it could be clearly seen that the Hanging Flute Island was in the center of the picture. The surrounding 100 miles were not empty, but there were many iron rocks and strange stones scattered in the sea. At a rough glance, there were more than 1,000 of them. Looking outside, one could see a spiritual wind revolving around it. Although there was only a weak chi flow on the picture, it was like a monstrous storm outside. The further one went, the faster the surging became. However, it seemed to be deliberately avoiding this part of the sea. The 100 miles of land was completely calm. There was no great formation guarding this place, nor was there any expert overseeing it. The reason for such a strange appearance was quite thought-provoking. When Zhang Yan came here, he asked Wang Nanshao about it, but the latter was already used to it. He only said that when his master came here with his disciples, it was like this. He guessed that this place might be a corner of the ancient continent. Now that it was submerged by the sea, it was still protected by the earth and chi. Zhang Yan knew that this was not the case. From ancient times until now, the earth and chi of the 9 continents had already been absorbed by cultivators. Unless one dug deep into the earth, it would be difficult to find it. In this world, there were not many cultivators with such ability, so it was only a wild guess. In ancient times, the cultivators fought with the demons, causing the central pillar to collapse. Many of the broken pillars were scattered in the sky. The fragments were purified by the heavenly extreme astral wind and the spiritual light of the sun and moon, turning into strong astral stones. The rest fell to the ground. The Hanging Flute Island was most likely one of the broken pillars and fell into the sea. The central pillar continent was connected to the sky and the earth. It was a gathering of the spirits of the 9 continents. If it wasn't near the 3 eastern continents, the demons and ferocious beasts of the 3 continents would have regarded it as a forbidden land. It had long been occupied by cultivators. Later, it cracked and collapsed, and the beautiful scenery was gone forever. Even so, the number of spiritual objects in the central pillar continent was greater than that of the 3 continents. If that was the case, then it would explain why there was such a blessed place far away from the continent. He took out the fish pearls from the box and pinched one with 2 fingers. He gently rubbed it and it turned into powder. After a moment of observation, he did not discover anything. After thinking for a moment, he raised his hand and wiped the box. The entire box of jade beads instantly turned into fine powder. At this moment, when he sensed it again, his eyes couldn't help but flash. It was clearly bred from the belly of a spiritual fish in the sea, but it contained a trace of indistinguishable yang qi. In that case, if what he was standing on was really the remnant of the central pillar, then it was very likely to be the section outside of the extreme heaven. Otherwise, it would be impossible for this qi to remain. His thoughts turned. He decided to go there personally to take a look. Thus, he stood up and walked out of the monastery before floating into the sky. He left the island and headed for the sea. Ever since Zhang Yan entered the island, everyone had been paying attention to his every move. As soon as he went out to sea, someone immediately reported it to Wang Nanshao. Because this person was afraid of Zhang Yan's cultivation, he didn't dare to ask for the contract. Thus, he was extremely worried that Zhang Yan wouldn't return, so he said, "If Taoist Zhang returns, immediately inform me." Zhang Yan followed the direction of the map. After traveling for tens of miles, he came to a wide reef. This reef was hundreds of feet wide. It was completely black and had long been polished by the waves. Looking from above, it looked like the back of a giant beast floating on the surface of the sea. He circled above, and seeing that he couldn't see anything strange, he descended and used the water escape technique to dive deep into the sea. In one breath, he sank 10,000 feet. Just now, he reached the bottom of the sea. Just now, when he looked again, the reef was clearly a large rock in the sea. The top and bottom were one, and the part that protruded out of the sea was only a slight edge. The part of the rock hidden under the sea was full of potholes, full of cracks and holes, like a beehive, and there were many strange fish with flowing lights coming in and out. This fish looked strange. There was a crown on its head, like a cluster of bright red coral, but its body was transparent like glass, and its internal organs could be seen clearly. At the end of the tail, there was a glittering crystal bead, full and smooth, bright and clean. Zhang Yan took a few glances and knew that this was the Songhua fish that Wang Nanshao mentioned. However, the ones in front of him were even bigger, at least 4 feet long. Looking around, there were probably tens of thousands of them. At this moment, they were gathered together, and under the reflection of the mountain walls, there were colorful waves everywhere. This school of fish was obviously not caught by people, and they swam around him without a sense of fear. He was not interested in this fish, and flew into a larger cave. After a few miles, stone pillars that were emitting colorful lights appeared in front of him. He stopped, stretched out his finger and pointed lightly, and the stone pillar instantly shattered, turning into countless fine sand. He grabbed a handful and sure enough, he felt the same strong yang qi in it, but it was very weak, and if he did not look carefully, he would miss it. It should be known that the Central Pillar continent was the most unique among the 9 continents. It had been bathed in the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth for a long time, and even if it was damaged, the spiritual essence it contained was extraordinary. Since that was the case, if the demon knew the inside story, it was not surprising that he wanted to take it for himself. Zhang Yan calculated in his heart, collecting the spiritual essence here was much easier than going to the extreme sky to capture the Jun-Yang spiritual essence, and the yang poison contained in it had mostly dissipated in the past tens of thousands of years. Because this place was just a random choice, he did not rule out the possibility that there was a better place here, so he did not start immediately, but flew out and circled around the outside. After doing so, he discovered that it was not just 100 miles, but thousands of miles away. It was all broken mountains, but most of the spiritual essence had been exhausted, and there were no spiritual fish living in it. He thought for a while and nodded subconsciously. These broken stones of the central pillar had been here for at least tens of thousands of years, and if he could find it, those cultivators who came from the east from the west continent would not have missed it. They must have been taken away by the demon, and what was left now was only a very small part. However, since he came here, he did not want to return empty-handed, so he took out a porcelain bottle, used his mana, and collected the spiritual essence. He was not greedy, and after a few hours, when the bottle was full, he put it away and used his escape method to return to the sea, back to his original residence. When Wang Nanshao knew that he was back, she heaved a sigh of relief and ordered people to send a lot of good things. Since Zhang Yan had taken the sea chart, he naturally wouldn't just leave like that. He took everything, and this action allowed Wang Nanshao to completely relax. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye, and in the blink of an eye, the time limit set by the demon had arrived. On this day, a strong wind suddenly blew on the sea, and dark clouds covered the sky. Countless large waves surged, and thousands of strange sea monsters emerged from the waves. They were all barebacked and barefooted, and they held spears in their hands as they stood on the waves. At this time, there was the sound of a drum, and hundreds of fish-headed monsters with bulging muscles worked together to pull out a giant shell that was 30 meters in size from the sea. The shell's petals were wide open, revealing its soft abdomen. There was a bed inside, and a fair-skinned and handsome young cultivator was sitting on it. His hair was tied up, and his eyebrows were trimmed. There was a hint of arrogance in his eyes, and he seemed to be insufferably arrogant. He glanced at the hanging flute island in high spirits, raised his hand, and said, "Who will go on my behalf and ask Dowrin whether he will fight or surrender?" As soon as he said this, several fish monsters covered in scales immediately stood up, and they all volunteered to go to the island. However, none of them were willing to fall behind, and soon, they began to push and shove each other. The young cultivator looked at the noisy crowd below, and he revealed a satisfied expression. He picked up a basket of jade beads beside him and casually threw it at the feet of a fish monster. He pointed at it and said, "I'll choose you. Go and come back quickly." The fish monster revealed an expression of joy, and it grabbed the bead, then turned around and dove into the water. the young cultivator waved his hand, and two enchanting female monsters with half their clothes on came up to massage his legs and back. Just as they were enjoying themselves, an object suddenly flew over from afar, and it landed at their feet with a thud, rolling a few times before coming to a stop. He lowered his head and saw that it was the head of the fish monster. He couldn't help but curse inwardly, and he kicked it away. He then looked at the island in front of him with a sneer, and said, "I originally wanted to let you live, but since you don't know what's good for you, I'll deal with you." He pushed the two female monsters away, and he leaped into the air. He took out a small flag from his bosom and lightly waved it a few times. A moment later, the waves surged up violently, and for a moment, they actually rose to a height of several dozen meters. He pointed forward again, and the waves surged towards the hanging flute island. At this moment, Zhang Yan had been invited to a pagoda at the highest point of the island. Apart from the owner of this place, Wang Nanshao, he was accompanied by a fellow Taoist who had rushed over to help earlier. This person was surnamed Lu, and he was from the Zhenluo Union of the Middle Pillar region. His cultivation was only at the first layer of the Yuanying realm. He seemed to have heard of Zhang Yan's name, and when he learned of it, his gaze always contained a hint of fear. At this moment, Wang Nanshao saw the waves approaching, and he said to Taoist Lu, "Let's first exhaust that demon's magic power. When its strength is exhausted, Taoist Lu and I will deal with it together." Taoist Lu naturally agreed. Wang Nanshao then turned to Zhang Yan, and he cupped his hands and said, "That demon is extremely powerful. If we can't defeat it, I'll have to ask for Taoist Lu's help." Previously, he couldn't defeat this demon because he was a sect master, and he had too many things to worry about. He had some misgivings, and it was difficult for him to display his full strength. But now, with a third-layer cultivator by his side, and with the help of a fellow Taoist, he agreed that he could fight with all his might. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since I have already promised Taoist Lu, I will naturally help out later." Wang Nanshao repeatedly agreed. He originally thought that the defensive formation on the island would be able to resist for a while, but to his surprise, the ground beneath his feet started to shake, and after a while, the entire island also started to tremble lightly. He couldn't help but change his expression, and he asked in surprise, "Where did that demon get that magic treasure? Why is it so powerful?" Zhang Yan slightly narrowed his eyes, but he could tell that the magic treasure was really ordinary. It was only used to control the power of the wind, clouds, and the sea. The problem was on the hanging flute island. The defensive formation here wasn't connected to the mountains, rivers, and the earth, so the magic treasure that was used to set up the formation wasn't strong enough to resist the demon. Elder Su felt the ground beneath his feet shaking more and more violently, and he said with a bitter smile, "Taoist Lu, we can't continue like this. It seems like we have to act earlier." Wang Nanshao helplessly said, "That's the only way." He turned his head to look at Zhang Yan, and his eyes were filled with anticipation. Zhang Yan smiled, and he stood up and said in a clear voice, "I will naturally go with you." Chapter 892. Ever since the young cultivator waved the small flag, he had been observing the movements on the island. Not long after, a cloud of light slowly flew out from the island. He knew that the person below couldn't bear it any longer and was forced to come out. He couldn't help but smile. After Wang Nanshao arrived in the sky, he hid in the cloud and looked at his opponent from afar. He was secretly shocked. After not seeing him for a long time, this demon's cultivation seemed to have improved again. One must know that when one's cultivation reached the Yuanying realm, it would take a long time to polish every little bit of cultivation if it wasn't in a blessed place. However, this person defied common sense. It was very likely that he had a fortuitous encounter recently. He suddenly lost confidence. He hesitated for a moment and turned to Zhang Yan, cupped his hands and said, "This demon's magic power seems to have improved again compared to the last time. Taoist Lu and I will fight with him first." Although he wanted to borrow the strength of Zhang Yan, he was afraid that once he showed up, he would scare the opponent away. Based on the speed of this demon's cultivation, the next time he came, his mana would be even stronger. At that time, no one would be able to resist him. He needed to take this opportunity to get rid of him once and for all. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and nodded. Wang Nanxiao and Taoist Lu greeted and both of them went to the front. They coldly cupped their hands and said, "Greetings, Taoist Li." The young cultivator laughed and returned the greeting. He said confidently, "Wang Daoren, the last time we met, you were not my opponent. Today it is still the same. I advise you to admit defeat as soon as possible. I won't kill you. I'll give you half a day. Take your disciples and leave as soon as possible." Although Wang Nanxiao was forced to the door, he didn't lose the demeanor of a cultivator. He didn't say anything harsh but said coldly, "My master led the people here to establish the sect. Now it's passed down to me. As a disciple, even if I'm useless, I won't be scared away by a few words." The young cultivator looked at Taoist Lu next to him and sneered. "Daoren Wang, I was wondering why you're so bold. So you've asked for help?" Wang Nanxiao calmly said, "Daoren is not fellow Taoist's match in a one-on-one fight, so I asked for help. If this battle was only for personal gain, he wouldn't be so shameless. But this time, it was for the sake of protecting the sect, so he didn't care about his own reputation." The young cultivator couldn't help but chuckle, "You're quite self-aware." While the three of them were talking, Zhang Yan was also sizing up the young man in the clouds. In his opinion, it was not too much for Wang Nanxiao to call him a demon. Although this youth surnamed Li cultivated a chi path cultivation technique, he still couldn't hide the fishy and sweet demonic aura on his body. From this, it could be seen that he didn't cultivate an orthodox Taoist cultivation technique, but an unorthodox cultivation technique. Otherwise, he would definitely be able to hide his aura. He thought to himself, "This person has cultivated for at least 600 to 700 years. It's not easy for a demon to cultivate to this stage. Not a single cultivation technique or spirit herb is missing. Most importantly, he needs a master to guide him. The West Sea is different from other places. Very few cultivators are willing to come here. Where did he learn his skills? Could he really be a disciple of a devil sect? Looks like I'll have to interrogate him later." The young cultivator suddenly felt a little uneasy, as if he had a feeling that today's matter wouldn't go smoothly. This thought came to him very inexplicably. However, he was determined to obtain this sea region, and he had a few tricks up his sleeves. He calmed his mind and stood up from the shell seat with a big laugh. He said to the two, "Daoren Wang, since words don't make sense, let's see who wins with our fists. Both of you come up together. After today, this land will have a new owner." Wang Nanxiao nodded to Taoist Lu. The two of them separated and took out their magic treasures. On Wang Nanxiao's side, there was a pair of magic swords that shone with a faint green light. On top of Taoist Lu's head, there was a golden centipede that shone brightly. It was so dazzling that even the surrounding dark clouds and fog couldn't conceal it. The young cultivator paid particular attention to the magic swords. He said with surprise, "Daoren Wang, you still have such good treasures? If you had taken them out last time, it wouldn't have been so easy to defeat you." Wang Nanxiao snorted. The magic swords were called green lightning swords. They were originally a pair and were left behind by the previous island master. They were refined using hundreds of spirit herbs from the middle continent. When they flew, they moved like lightning and possessed great power, especially when it came to restraining demons. However, because the Hanging Flute Island was far above the West Sea, it wasn't easy to gather precious materials. They were afraid that it would be difficult to refine and repair the swords after they were damaged, so they didn't easily show them to others. Now that the sect was on the brink of extinction, they finally took them out to face the enemy. At this time, he no longer held back. He cast an incantation and flew up on the swords. Suddenly, there was a loud clap of thunder, and two green lights slashed down like dragons. When Taoist Lu saw him attack, he took out a small mallet and pointed it at the golden centipede, immediately knocking it 3 times. In an instant, 3 sounds of clouds splitting and stones piercing resounded. The aquatic demons watching the battle from the sidelines immediately held their heads and howled miserably. One by one, they fell from the waves. When the young cultivator heard these sounds, he was also in a daze. When he came back to his senses, the 2 green lightning swords were already in front of his eyes and nose. He couldn't dodge anymore. With a poochie sound, the swords pierced through his body. Taoist Lu was startled, then he said happily, "Did you succeed?" Wang Nanxiao frowned. When he looked again, he saw the fallen body emitting a cloud of black fog. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a piece of dried fish skin. It fell into the sea and disappeared. He looked around and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist, be careful. This person used a Taoist technique to avoid it." A laugh came from the sky. The dark clouds parted, and the young cultivator floated out. He praised, "Darren Wang, you really have some tricks up your sleeve. If I didn't have this death substitution technique, I would have really fallen into your trap." When Zhang Yan heard this, he smiled. The real death substitution technique was a superior technique. Even in the Devil's Doctrine, there weren't many people who could successfully cultivate it. This person's technique was at most a shedding technique. However, he didn't mean to look down on his opponent. Techniques were inherently divided into good and bad, but when it came to a real battle, it all depended on how one used it. If one used it in concert with one's body, the effect might not necessarily be worse than those superior techniques. Just like the black-yellow giant hand that he practiced. It wasn't a true superior Taoist technique, but when it was combined with his vast mana, it immediately showed infinite power. When Wang Nanxiao saw his opponent appear, he didn't say anything and slashed with his magic sword again. The young cultivator waved his hand, and a dozen smooth and round beads appeared from his sleeve. They collided with the green light. For a moment, thunder and lightning flashed, and the treasure light shot up to the sky. There was a deafening sound of collision. Seeing that the two of them were entangled, Taoist Lu didn't want to miss this opportunity. He used his mana to hit the golden centipede again, and the treasure vibrated again. The young cultivator sneered and formed a protective technique. He stood straight, but he was completely unharmed. Ever since he succeeded in his cultivation, the number of times he fought with others was actually not that many. His experience was still lacking. Just now, when he encountered a method that he had never seen before, he suffered a loss. But now that he was prepared, it was impossible for him to suffer a loss again. However, the sound didn't stop, and he was tired of listening to it. Besides, if he didn't make a killing move now, there was no guarantee that the two of them would have other tricks waiting for him. Therefore, he divided some of his attention and took a deep breath. His abdomen swelled as if he had swallowed a big iron ball. Then he puffed his cheeks and blew. Suddenly, a whistling wind came out and rushed forward with an unstoppable force. Wang Nanxiao's expression changed. He said, "Be careful, fellow Taoist." During the last battle, he was swept away by this strange wind and was swept away for more than 10 miles. When he came back, he blew out another breath before he could make a move. He couldn't get close to his opponent at all, and he couldn't use his magic treasures or Taoist techniques at all. After 4 or 5 rounds, his mana was almost exhausted, and he could only run away in embarrassment. Taoist Lu heard from him that this wind couldn't be resisted, so he only used his protective light and was ready to let him go. He would come back later. However, just as he did that, he suddenly felt something was wrong. The wind was mixed with countless black golden sand. Under the grinding, the protective light dimmed in the blink of an eye. He couldn't help but be shocked. At this time, the world was spinning, and he couldn't control his mana freely. He wanted to use his magic treasures, but he couldn't and could only struggle to maintain it. The young cultivator smiled proudly. His supernatural power was called Startling Cloud Wind. Although it was powerful, it couldn't hurt people. Therefore, he had collected a lot of solid fine sand from the strange rocks at the bottom of the sea. Now that he scattered it into the wind, it immediately had a miraculous effect. Seeing his friend in danger, Wang Nanxiao was anxious and shouted, "Zhenrenzhang, please help us." As soon as he said this, suddenly, there was a mighty mana falling, and the spiritual vigor within a radius of 10 miles was fixed. The clouds in the sky dispersed, and a handsome young Taoist walked out. His body was surrounded by clear light, and the spiritual qi was running like the tide. There was not a single cloud on top of him. As he came out, the turbid clouds in the sky dispersed, and the tide slowly receded. The young cultivator's eyes widened, and he cried out, Yuaning Dharmakaya? However, after the shock, his face turned pale, and he revealed a terrified expression. A third-stage cultivator was not someone he could fight against. Now that he was trapped by the heaven and earth restriction, he couldn't escape. He was afraid that his life would be in danger today. Taoist Lu recovered from the shock. He straightened the Taoist hat on his head and came up to express his gratitude. "Thank you for saving me." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "You're too kind. Even if I didn't help, you could still escape." Taoist Lu shook his head and sighed, "I'm ashamed. I panicked and lost my mind. If it wasn't for you, even if I didn't die, I would still be seriously injured. I don't know how to repay your kindness." Zhang Yan looked at the two of them and pointed at the young cultivator. "If that's the case, how about you two hand this demon over to I?" Although Wang Nanshao was somewhat unwilling, seeing that the demon that he found difficult to deal with had no power to resist Zhang Yan's hands, he hurriedly bowed his head and said, "This demon was captured by Taoist master. As for how to deal with it, how would the two of us dare to interfere?" Zhang Yan said with a smile, "Then I will take this demon away. Don't worry, I won't let it come back to cause trouble." Wang Nanshao heard this and couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. He only needed to protect the mountain gate, and he didn't care about what would happen to the demon. Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves and a strong gust of wind engulfed him. Then, he flew for nearly 1,000 miles and landed on a rock on the sea. He threw him down and asked indifferently, "Where did you learn this skill from?" Chapter 893. Although the young cultivator had come into contact with many cultivators since he was successful in his cultivation, he had always kept his background a secret. Alas, he was the meat on the chopping block. He couldn't fight back. After struggling for a while, he said in a low voice, "This little demon's divine arts and Tao techniques were imparted by a stone statue." A stone statue imparting a technique? Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He had previously guessed that this person was either a remnant disciple of the Western continent, or that he had inadvertently obtained the abode of a predecessor. Because this place was close to the Middle Pillar continent, he had even thought of that person, but this answer was somewhat unexpected. He then asked, "What exactly is the general situation? Tell me in detail." The young cultivator had no choice but to reveal his origins. It turned out that his name was Li Xiaomi, and his original form was a mutated vicious snakehead in the Western Sea. Not only could he forage in the sea, but he could also come up to the land. He could run between the reef islands and pounce on small beasts. Because it was nurtured by the spiritual vigor of the sea, after a long time, it gained sentience. Later on, when he was chasing after a spirit lizard, he accidentally landed on a deserted island. There, he encountered a stone statue that could speak, and he received its guidance. From then on, he cultivated a set of divine Tao techniques. When Zhang Yan heard this, he sighed in his heart. Even if this opportunity was not unique, it could be considered rare in the world. Although there were many wandering cultivators in the world who could cultivate to the Yuaning realm, if one were to look deeper, they would find that they had something to do with a sect. They really had no foundation. There were many reasons for this, but the most important one was that without guidance, even if one obtained a superior Tao book, it would be difficult to understand its meaning. If one were to forcefully practice it, it would be hard to avoid the danger of qi deviation. Without the support of the sect, without the help of the people of the same path, he would need to spend a lot of energy on finding spiritual items for cultivation. Where would he find the time to cultivate? Although he was alone and free, if he incurred enmity with someone or met a powerful enemy, without anyone to help him, he might not even be able to keep his life. But to Li Xiaomi, it was not a problem at all. Although the West Sea had been implicated by the 3 Western continents in the past, and its spiritual essence had declined prematurely, making it inferior to the other 3 seas. But a sea of phase. It's not a small number. Since he was born in the water tribe with magic power behind him, he could naturally search for what he needed to cultivate in the vast ocean currents. Since ancient times, there were very few cultivators in this part of the sea, so they had never encountered any formidable opponents. After receiving the stone statue's guidance, He also wouldn't casually kill people. Every time a tribulation came, he even knew a way to avoid it, and he managed to cultivate to this stage safely. His luck was really good. But very few people could compare. Zhang Yan asked with interest, "The stone statue that guided you, could it be that it's also a spiritual monster?" Li Xiaomi said, "I thought so too at first, but after my cultivation went up, it was really just a stone statue that could speak human language. There was nothing special about it." At this point, he hesitated for a moment before continuing, "Or maybe it's because this little demon's knowledge is shallow and I can't see the true appearance." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment before asking, "Where is it now?" Li Xiaomi hesitated for a moment, but since he had already revealed the most secretive thing, there was no need to hide it. He said, "Head north, about a day's journey, and that's where the nameless island is." Zhang Yan asked a few more questions, then said, "You lead the way, bring me there to take a look." Li Xiaomi did not dare to disobey, so he agreed. Zhang Yan shook his sleeves, stirring up a strong wind from the flat ground, wrapping around the demon's cloud, and then flew towards the direction he pointed. For hours later, Li Xiaomi pointed to a small island below and said, "This is it." Zhang Yan looked down and saw that there was nothing special about the island. There was no formation door or prohibition, and there was no spiritual opportunity. If someone passed by the sea, they would not pay much attention. Under Li Xiaomi's guidance, he kept his mana and slowly descended. Finally, he stood in front of a steep mountain wall. Li Xiaomi took a few steps forward and pushed aside the grass, revealing a stone statue of a Taoist. It was in a sitting posture, and its face was similar to a real person, but it was only half the height of a human. He knelt down, kowtowed, and then called out softly, "Mister?" Zhang Yan looked at the side and did not disturb him. From his senses, this stone statue was very strange. Although there was no spiritual opportunity, there was a trace of a spiritual talisman wrapped around it. After 100 breaths, suddenly the stone statue trembled slightly, and there was white smoke coming out from its 7 orifices. Then, a pair of stone eyes seemed to have become a little more lively and said, "Xiaomi, did you bring a fellow Taoist here?" Li Xiaomi did not know how to answer. Zhang Yan took 2 steps forward and said with a smile, "I have not known fellow Taoist Li for long. I heard that he was imparted by you, and that was how he obtained his cultivation experience. I was curious, so I specially came to pay a visit." Who knew that when the stone statue heard it, not only did it not blame him, but it was also very happy and said, "I have been on this island for many years, but this is the first time I have a visitor. It is a pity that I am alone, and have no tea or wine, so I can't treat you well." Zhang Yan smiled, "I should be the host for taking the liberty to visit." With a wave of his sleeve, a ball of clear air flew out and slowly dispersed. Then a 3-story pagoda appeared and he said, "Fellow Taoist, please come up for a chat." The stone statue saw that he did not see it as a different species, and instead treated it as a Taoist cultivator of the same generation. It felt extremely happy and said, "Xiaomi, carry me up." Li Xiaomi went forward, carried the stone statue, and followed Zhang Yan into the pagoda. Inside the pagoda, Zhang Yan walked to the main seat, bowed, and said, "Fellow Taoist, please." Li Xiaomi hurriedly placed the stone statue on the guest seat gently. After it was properly placed, Zhang Yan also sat down and called for Zhang Chan to serve tea. Even though he knew that the stone statue could not taste tea, he still served it a cup and placed it in front of the stone statue. The stone statue was even more happy, and if it was not for the fact that it could not move, it would have probably started dancing. It only said, "It is my honor to be able to meet Taoist." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I have something to say, please forgive me, fellow Taoist." The stone statue said, "Please speak, Taoist." Zhang Yan said, "From what I see, you are neither a treasure nor a spirit, neither a demon nor a demon. May I know where you are from?" The stone statue said honestly, "I am a Taoist imparting instrument." The moment Zhang Yan heard the name, he knew its use, and nodded with a smile, and said, "Fellow Taoist does not have any mana, but you can guide fellow Taoist Li to this stage. You are indeed worthy of the name Taoist imparting. I wonder which wise sage had such a skill?" To infuse a true spirit into an artifact, it was not inferior to refining a true artifact. To be able to have such ability, one should at least be an image phase realm cultivator. The stone statue said, 10,000 years ago, there was a sect in the West Source continent called the Longevity Monastery. I was refined by the monastery head, Hao Rufang, at that time. However, there were few disciples in the monastery, and one time, they encountered a great enemy. After a fierce battle, only this Taoist master survived, and he was also heavily injured. He was afraid that after he passed away, the sect would be severed, and there would be no one to enlighten the spirit of reincarnation, so he refined me. After Zhang Yan had a detailed discussion with Zhou Chongju, he knew a lot about the 3 West continents. He had also mentioned a few sections. However, he had never heard of the Longevity Monastery. As for the West Source continent, that was the name of the continent in the ancient times. Until now, the Taoist books and records had already changed to the West Qin continent. Zhang Yan said again, according to what fellow Taoist said, you have been trapped in the body for 10,000 years, and since you have a true spirit, you can also harvest spiritual vigor, so why don't you try to escape? The stone statue sighed. It is not that I do not want to, but all the spiritual vigor I have harvested all these years have been used to maintain this trace of true spirit, and I have no spare energy to do other things. However, Taoist Master Hao once said that there is a talisman in this body, and as long as I leave behind a successor and reopen my sect, I will be able to escape. Zhang Yan glanced at Li Xiaomi, and smiled and said, I guess fellow Taoist Li is the person that fellow Taoist chose. Li Xiaomi grinned. It was not easy to open a sect, and he first needed to find a place of enlightenment. If it was not for the Xiandi Island, he would not have made things difficult for that Daoren Wang, and ended up in Zhang Yan's hands. The stone statue said, although Xiaomi is a demon, he is wise. I taught him 5 magical arts, and he was able to comprehend 4 of them in a few years. As long as he does not make any mistakes, it is only a matter of time before the sect is restored. At this moment, Li Xiaomi showed a helpless expression. Among the 5 magical arts, there was an escape technique, and he believed that if he had learned it, he would not have been captured so quickly today. However, cultivating these techniques required a great deal of spirit medicine and precious materials, and they couldn't be found anywhere in the Western Sea. Only the sky-shocking gale only required one's own magic power, so it was the most effective. The stone statue said, what is fellow Taoist doing in the West Sea? As far as I know, the West continent has been abandoned, and the cultivators have already left for the central continent. Zhang Yan said, I want to study the mysteries of heaven and earth with the help of the eroded writings, but there are not many of them left in the East continent. Thinking that the West continent is the source of the cultivators of the 9 continents, I came here. The stone statue was silent for a moment, and then said, I remember something. More than 10,000 years ago, a few cultivators from beyond the heavens came and fought with the cultivators of the West continent. Among them was the eroded writings competition. Fellow Taoist, you can go and find them, and perhaps you will learn something. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up and he asked, where are they? The stone statue said, these cultivators were all great cultivators. I heard that they used heaven and earth as their records, and used mountains and rivers as their writings. I don't know why, but I know that they are in the West continent. If fellow Taoist is fated, you may be able to see them. Zhang Yan was slightly startled, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face, and then he nodded. Yes, the path of eroded writings originally contained the mountains and rivers of heaven and earth. It was a little narrow for him to only look for those that were carved on the tablets and jade scrolls. Once he thought about it, he suddenly felt enlightened, as if an invisible barrier had been opened, and his mind became very clear. He said with a smile, fellow Taoist, your words have solved a barrier in I's heart, but I don't know how I should thank you. Li Xiaomi's heart was moved, and she said, how about fellow Taoist, take Mr. away from here? Zhang Yan smiled, what do you think, fellow Taoist? The stone statue refused, saying, although I don't have any spiritual energy, I have lived here for 10,000 years. Obviously, my fate has been decided. If I leave, I'm afraid there will be a disaster. Now that I have taught a disciple, I will be able to leave on the day of completion. If fellow Taoist is free, why don't you come and be my guest? Seeing that he was unwilling, Zhang Yan didn't force him. After thinking for a while, he looked at Zhang Chan and said, "Go to the mountains and catch 2 land creatures." Zhang Chan said, "Master, this is easy. I will be back in a moment." He left the pagoda and flew into the forest. Not long after, he returned with 2 creatures, a white snake and a giant tortoise. Zhang Yan looked at them and nodded. Zhang Chan did a good job this time. The snake and tortoise were already more than 100 years old, and they had gained a bit of spirituality. Although they were still far from gaining spiritual wisdom, it wouldn't be difficult if they could get his help. He took out 2 form transformation pills and ordered Zhang Chan to stuff them into their mouths. Then he stretched out his hand to help them. Not long after, the snake and the tortoise both transformed into 2 boys. However, they wore slightly bewildered expressions as they kowtowed incessantly. Zhang Yan looked at them and said, "Today I will give you 2 pills, but not for free. You must take good care of this fellow Taoist. When the day of completion comes, you can leave on your own." Chapter 894. Zhang Yan chatted with the stone statue for a whole night and learned a lot. After all, the statue was a technique-imparting artifact. It was knowledgeable and knew many secrets that ordinary cultivators didn't know about. Even though most of it was just old news, it was still useful for his trip to the West Continent. He bid farewell to the statue at dawn the next day, leaving only the snake and the tortoise behind to guard it. The statue couldn't move, so Li Xiaomi sent him off. Li Xiaomi followed him anxiously. He didn't know what Zhang Yan and Wang Nanshao were planning to do, so he couldn't guess how they would deal with him. Zhang Yan smiled when he saw this. Since this demon had nothing to do with the cultivators of the devil sect and was the one who had sent the stone statue to rebuild the sect, there was no need for Zhang Yan to make things difficult for him. He said, "When I took you away earlier, I promised fellow Taoist Wang that you would not be allowed to set foot on the Hanging Flute Island. If you can make an oath and abide by this promise, I will let you go." Li Xiaomi felt like he was granted amnesty and said, "I'm willing to make an oath, I'm willing to make an oath." With a thought, a contract flew out from Zhang Yan's sleeve and floated 3 feet in front of him. At the same time, he said in a deep voice, "But words don't count. You need to sign a contract." Li Xiaomi's heart trembled when he saw the contract. He knew that once he signed the contract, he would have to make an oath if he violated it in the future. Although he didn't want to pretend to agree, he felt a bit uncomfortable thinking about being bound by something in the future. He took a deep breath and took the contract. He released some of his blood essence and used his finger as a pen to write his name on the contract. Zhang Yan waited for him to finish. He took it back and read it briefly before putting it away. He said, "For the sake of fellow Taoist Shi, I have a message for you. If you establish a sect in the future, remember not to act recklessly and kill any living beings. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble." Li Xiaomi complained, "Taoist priest, I've never harmed anyone because of Mr. Shi's guidance." Zhang Yan said with a faint smile, "Time flies. The world changes. Even if you don't think that way now, who knows what will happen in the future? Even if you don't do it yourself, can you guarantee that your disciples are also ordinary? However, I will not restrict you in this regard. If he acted recklessly, there was no need for I to take action. Naturally, someone will come looking for you." Li Xiaomi did not refute this time. He was a demon, and there would definitely be demons among his future disciples. If one's cultivation was not up to par, one's nature would take the upper hand, and one might make a mistake. Once this kind of thing started, it would be difficult to clean up. One had to know that regardless of whether it was the Central Pillar or the Western Sea, they were both human cultivators. If they were attacked by a group of cultivators, the outcome would be obvious. He lowered his head and thought for a while, then bowed solemnly to Zhang Yan and said sincerely, "Thank you for your guidance." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Take care." He turned around and boarded the flood dragon chariot. Then, the 2 flood dragons shook their heads and tails at the same time. Auspicious clouds appeared under their feet, and they carried the chariot into the sea clouds. Li Xiaomi stood where he was and bowed to the sky. This time, Zhang Yan's journey was smooth. After a few months of traveling across the vast ocean, he finally saw a gray shadow at the end of the horizon. He silently calculated his position and said, "This should be the West Sinking Continent." The West Sinking Continent was known as the West Constellation Continent in ancient times. Although it was the smallest among the three continents, 10,000 years ago, there were thousands of Taoist sects on the continent, and it could be said to be extremely prosperous. However, after that huge change, the middle of the continent caved in, and the surrounding mountains bulged out, separating the ocean from the sea, creating a huge lake. Zhang Yan came out of the pagoda and leaned on the railing. He saw that the mountain wall was steep, as if it was carved by an axe or a knife. It rose and fell straight down, reaching up to the clouds and down to the abyss of the sea. It spanned hundreds of millions of miles, surrounding the land of the continent. It was solemn and grand, showing the wonders of creation. Zhang Chan said in surprise, "Master, the terrain is so majestic." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "When that Taoist sure described the scenery of this continent, he used 4 lines. The eternal gates of heaven lock the spirit sea. When will the dragon python open? The birds fly across the clouds, the sound of the bridge morning, the sun setting beyond the heavenly mountains to refer to the scenery." Now, it seems that it is exactly as he said. Zhang Chan scratched his head and said, "Master, the land of the continent has been flooded. I'm afraid the erosion runes are gone too, right?" Zhang Yan smiled and did not say anything. The erosion runes created by the ancient almighties were all in accordance with the operation of heaven and earth. How could they disappear so easily? Even if the sea had changed into mulberry fields, there would still be traces of them. It was just that there would be some twists and turns in his search. However, with his level of understanding of the erosion runes, it would only take him a few more days. After a few more glances, he said, "Go forward." The flood dragon carriage moved, leaping over the peak and heading into the continent. As soon as he entered the continent, what he saw was a large lake that seemed to be formed by the gathering of the water from the sky. Smoke rose and the clouds flowed. He tried to discern it and felt some spiritual vigor. He was slightly surprised. He remembered that both Zhou Changju and the stone statue had said that the reason why the old land of the West continent had become like this was because someone had rashly moved the earth's roots and caused the land to change. Calamities and tribulations arose and the spiritual vigor collapsed. In the end, the cultivators had no choice but to travel east to other continents to find another place of enlightenment. Although the spiritual vigor was weak, it was not completely gone. It was very different from what the two of them had said. He thought about it again and nodded slowly. As the saying goes, the weak are used by the Tao. Although the spiritual vigor of the 3 continents had been exhausted, the Earth's roots of the 9 continents still existed. After tens of thousands of years of recuperation and accumulation, and with no external disturbances, it had recovered a little. However, that was all. This little spiritual vigor could not be compared to the few continents of Donghua. It was even worse than the Dongsheng continent. If cultivators from other continents came here, the most they could do was to maintain their mana. As for improving their cultivation, it was impossible. Based on the scene before him, it would take tens of thousands of years to return to the blessed land of cultivation in the past. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard the sound of flapping wings. He glanced over and saw that the flock of birds on the lake were frightened by the power of the flood dragon. They all flew up, but it was difficult to estimate their numbers. For a moment, they covered the sky and the sun, and the sound of their chirping was endless. There were also waves in the water, and it was obvious that many big fish were fleeing in panic. He thought to himself that if such a lake appeared in the Donghua continent, there would definitely be countless spirits and monsters born in the water. However, the spiritual vigor in this place was meager. Even if the birds and beasts grew larger, they would not be able to become monsters. At this moment, the flood dragon carriage slowed down. One of the flood dragons turned around and said, "Immortal, where should I go?" Zhang Yan looked into the distance. Although the main purpose of this trip was to observe the ancient eroding inscriptions, There was another thing he wanted to do. He wanted to kill the ferocious creature that was sealed here by the Tai Ming Grandmaster and devour its essence so that he could improve his divine contract. As for the 3 continents in the west, there was one in each boundary. Fortunately, with the help of the headmaster, he already knew the specific location, so there was no need to search around. He said, "Just go west." The 2 flood dragons let out a long roar and roused themselves. They pulled the pagoda and flew west. After traveling for 7 to 8 days in the boundless marsh, they saw a small continent in the distance. Zhang Chan muttered, "Could it be that we've reached our destination?" Zhang Yan counted with his fingers and nodded, "This is the place." Zhang Chan pointed down and said, "There seems to be someone there." Zhang Yan turned around and saw a few boats floating on the water. He said, "It seems that although the change 10,000 years ago was huge, it did not kill off all the mortals here." The flood dragon carriage moved forward for another 100 miles. The 2 flood dragons became restless and said, "Immortal, there seems to be something strange here." Zhang Yan also sensed it. If the people in the continent looked at it from a close distance, they might not see anything unusual. However, when he stood high up and looked at the surrounding 10,000 kilometers, he could see that this small continent was actually buried deep in the lake, like a whirlpool. However, the water that should have been low did not submerge it. Instead, it circled around the continent, as if it was repelled by an invisible force. Apart from that, the island was also shrouded by an unknown demonic aura. The aura was extremely strong, and it was incompatible with the thin spiritual vigor around it. His eyes narrowed. This was most likely the doing of the ferocious creature. It seemed that even if the monster had not escaped, it was not far away. At this moment, Zhang Chan volunteered, "Master, why don't I go and take a look?" Zhang Yan shook his head. The ferocious creature in the West Trap continent was called the Thousand-Eyed Flower Toad. Among the 6 ferocious creatures, its mana was not the strongest. However, it had the ability to determine its own fortune and avoid harm. Since it was about to escape, it would not have thought that the Qinsong school would send someone to suppress it. Looking at the current situation, it seemed that they had made some arrangements. To be able to shroud the entire island, even if it had not fully recovered, its mana was not much weaker than his. Moreover, Zhang Chan's cultivation experience was not weak. Once he entered, he might alert the enemy. He could not act rashly. With a thought, he immediately had an idea. He shook his sleeve and released the mortal incarnation that he had previously refined. Then he stretched out his hand and pointed at it. He separated an extremely small strand of his soul and attached it to it. Then he gently pushed it on his shoulder and sent it down. The incarnation was originally sitting cross-legged with its eyes closed. When it reached the ground, it opened its eyes and tidied up its Taoist robe. It then walked towards a fishing village that came into view. The body's appearance was 60% similar to Zhang Yan's. However, it had the appearance of a middle-aged Taoist. It attracted the attention of the ferocious creature. There was a little mana in its body, but it was enough to deal with mortals. After walking for a mile, it saw a sturdy fisherman mending his fishing net on the beach. 2 4- to 5-year-old urchins were chasing and playing beside him. Zhang Yan's incarnation walked forward and greeted, "Fisherman, please." The fisherman had already noticed him. Seeing him greet him, he was stunned. Then he hurriedly put down his work, wiped his clothes and raised his hands to greet him. The 2 urchins also stopped playing and ran over to surround him curiously. They even touched his clothes from time to time. The fisherman was shocked. He quickly pulled the 2 urchins over and apologized profusely. The incarnation did not mind and said that it was fine. Then it said, "I am a Qi practitioner from outside the mountain. I came to your place by boat. May I know what world this is?" The fisherman came to a realization. He sighed and said, "Taoist, you must have come from another continent to seek refuge here. This is not easy. I heard that there are a few islands out there that have been flooded. Only my surging spring continent has the protection of the mountain god, so it did not suffer." Chapter 895. Zhang Yan's incarnation followed the fisherman's words and asked further. Only then did he find out that other than this place, there were quite a number of small continents scattered across the lake like stars. There were big and small ones, and there were many traces of people on them. There were also dynasties that changed, and the lords of a region were like the feudal lords of small countries. However, in these 100 years, there were always inexplicable floods that drowned quite a number of continents. Only the gushing spring continent was abnormally stable. Even if there were huge waves, they would quickly recede. Therefore, in recent years, there were quite a number of people who escaped to this place by boat. The incarnation was slightly interested in the mountain god and couldn't help but ask a few more questions. However, the fisherman was limited in his knowledge, so when he asked about such things, he was always at a loss. In the end, he slapped his head and said, "How could I forget about this? I can bring Taoist priest to see the clan elder. He was once an official in the prefecture city, maybe he can explain it to you." The incarnation said, "That's great." The fisherman excitedly led him into the village. After walking for about 2 to 3 miles, the two of them arrived at the village. The place wasn't big, and it looked like there were about 100 people. Most of the houses were built with big stones, and they were quite thick. It must have been built to withstand the strong winds on the water. After walking for a short while, the fisherman stopped in front of a huge house. Not only was there a stone lion guarding the door, there were also high walls and cornices. One look and one could tell that it wasn't an ordinary house. The fisherman went forward to knock on the door, and after a while, an old man who was guarding the door came out. He said a few words to the old man, and the latter popped his head out to take a look. He said, "Wait." Then he closed the door. From the sound of footsteps, he went inside. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the door opened, and an old man with a walking stick walked out. He was about 70 years old, and his hair was white. He wore a green robe. He seemed to be in good spirits, and behind him, there was a strong follower who never left his side. He sized up the incarnation. In the past, there were also people who came to this place to escape, but none of them had this appearance. He knew that the incarnation had a background, so he came forward and bowed. "Taoist priest, greetings." The incarnation already knew from the previous conversation that the people in this village all had the surname Shi, so he bowed and said, "Shi Gong, greetings." "I don't deserve it." Shi Gong stood there and didn't come over. He only said slowly, "I wonder which god did Taoist priest worship?" The incarnation said, "I have never worshipped a god." Shi Gong heard these words. There wasn't much expression on his face. He only said, "I don't know how Taoist priest is in other places, but in my Gushing Spring region, if it's convenient to travel outside, you must pay your respects to the Gushing Spring mountain god." The incarnation understood what he meant. He laughed and said, "Thank you, Shi Gong, for speaking frankly. I will go to the temple later to offer incense." Shi Gong saw that he had listened to him. His expression softened a little as he raised his walking stick and pointed it at the door. He said, "Invite the Taoist priest in to talk." The incarnation followed him into a large hall. The old man invited him to sit down, and after the servant served him a cup of tea, he knocked on the side and inquired about the incarnation's origins. This incarnation was not Zhang Yan's own body, but merely a strand of his soul. The mana of memory was also created out of thin air. If one disregarded the origin, they were actually two different people. Therefore, in his mind, the place where he came from did indeed exist, and there was nothing to hide. He told the truth. "I came from Bai Huizhou. I drifted on the water from east to west for several months before arriving at your place." Bai Huizhou? Shi Gong muttered twice, but felt that he had never heard of this place before. However, there were countless islands in this swamp known as Guanglan, so it was not strange that he did not know of it. He asked again, "Did Taoist priest come here alone?" The incarnation sighed and said, "There were more than 10 people when I came, but we encountered a giant beast in the water and the boat capsized. Fortunately, a few disciples risked their lives to protect me, and only I managed to escape with my life. It's a pity that the others were all eaten by the fish." Shi Gong hurriedly comforted him, then stroked his beard and changed the topic. "May I ask where Taoist priest is heading to?" The incarnation said, "I'm looking for a safe place to live." Shigong laughed and said, "Then there's something to talk about." The incarnation cupped his hands and said, "Please advise me, Shigong." Shigong looked at him and asked, "Taoist priest wants to go to the inner continent. Do you have any treasure with you?" The incarnation asked curiously, "What treasure?" Shigong cupped his hands towards the sky and said, "His Majesty has once issued a decree that if people from other continents want to move into our continent, if they have a spiritual treasure to offer, they will be rewarded generously. The highest can be a county magistrate, and even the lowest can be rewarded with 100 mu of land." The incarnation couldn't help but look sideways and asked, "There's such a good thing, what kind of treasure is it? Does gold, pearls, and jade artifacts count?" Shigong shook his head and said, "Naturally not those common objects, but objects with spirit." Objects with spirit. The incarnation lowered his head and thought for a while, then took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and said, "Shigong, do you think this counts?" Shigong turned his head and instructed. The long attendant beside him ran into the house and brought out a copper plate. It was polished to the point that it could reflect one's reflection, and there was a shallow layer of water in the plate. He pointed and said, "Taoist priest, please put this item into the plate." The incarnation placed the jade talisman into the plate, and after a while, the copper plate trembled slightly and released a ray of red light, illuminating the entire hall. Shigong revealed a look of surprise and said, "This is undoubtedly a top spiritual treasure." To be able to find a spiritual treasure for the monarch, as the person who introduced him, he had done a meritorious deed, so he would also be rewarded. His expression couldn't help but become more fervent, and he cupped his hands together and said, "Taoist priest, please stay here for the night. Tomorrow, I will bring Taoist priest to see the gate guard of Jinling City." The incarnation repeatedly thanked him. It was already dusk time. The minister of Shi ordered people to serve wine and dishes, and invited Wei Xiaobao to join them. When the lanterns were lit, he politely escorted Wei Xiaobao out, and arranged for people to find a comfortable guest room for him to stay. On the second day, the incarnation followed Shigong to see the gate guard, and specially went to the mountain god temple to pay a visit. Immediately, the temple devotee bestowed him with a qi cultivation method, and asked him to go out to sea to search for spiritual objects. If he succeeded, he could even be summoned by the mountain god. However, the incarnation had the cultivation method in his memory, so he didn't bother to do it. Just like that, a month passed, and the reward from the country had yet to arrive. Suddenly, he had the urge to travel, and took a boat to the lake to fish. However, for some reason he suddenly yawned and felt sleepy. In the end, his body tilted, and he fell into a deep sleep. At this moment, there was a ray of spiritual light that flew out from his body, and headed towards the east. In one breath, it flew 100 miles away, and flew into the pagoda on the water. At this moment, Zhang Yan was sitting on a cattail hassock. When he saw the ray of spiritual light, he raised his hand and caught it in his palm. Then he silently chanted a spell, and in an instant, he knew everything that the incarnation had said and done for the past month. This mountain god's aura is the same as the demonic aura on the island, so it must be the thousand-eyed demon toad. From the rumors, this demon can already transform into an incarnation to travel, and can even attend the banquet in the imperial court. Looking at this situation, it seems that it is no longer suppressed by the prohibition, but it still has no power to leave this island, so it needs to steal spiritual opportunity from the spiritual treasure in order to escape. As for the matter of searching for spiritual treasures, perhaps the mortals here only thought that the king was fond of rare items, but he could see the real reason with one look. The West Fall state was different from the East Flower and East Xing states. Spiritual opportunity was not flourishing, and even if it escaped from the prohibition, it was already difficult to maintain its body from breaking down, and to recover to its peak would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. And absorbing spiritual opportunity from the spiritual treasure was indeed a feasible way. Zhang Yan once heard from the stone statue that not all the sects were willing to abandon their sect's foundations and head east. Many sects still had the thought of turning back, and sealed many of their treasures in the old land of their mountain. If the demon toad could find one or two of them, it would undoubtedly be able to cultivate some mana. Although it would not be able to recover its cultivation level, but if it accumulated enough, it could help it leave the continent. Once it reached a place like the Middle Pillar state where spiritual opportunity flourished, with ample time, it would not be difficult for it to recover its previous supernatural powers. Zhang Yan smiled coldly. This thousand-eyed toad had put in a lot of effort to help him escape, and it even knew how to make use of mortals in exchange for a normal demon. How would it have thought of this? From this, it could be deduced that this demon was at its weakest, and it was the perfect time for him to strike and destroy it. However, in this continent, there were millions of households. Once a fight broke out, it would be hard to avoid the repercussions, and the lives would be lost. Moreover, this demon toad had been operating on his island for a long time, and it might have set up some powerful tricks. Hence, he had to think of a way to lure it out of its nest. He thought for a while and immediately came up with an idea. He came out of the pagoda, stirred up the wind and clouds, and headed towards the water. After traveling for hundreds of miles, he stopped. With a wave of his hand, he instantly activated the 5 elements escape technique, and a vast amount of mana spread outwards. In an instant, countless silt from the bottom of the lake rolled up, and moved to the surface of the water, and gathered at one spot. As his mana continued to circulate, more and more soil and rocks gathered at this spot. In less than half a day, he actually created an island out of thin air. He floated to the top of a hill, reached into his sleeve, and took out the box of fish pearls that Wang Nanshao gave him. He opened the box, and instantly, there was a spiritual light and the aura of treasure emitted from it. If the people on the Gushing Spring Island saw it, they would definitely come looking for it. However, that was not enough. He thought for a while, and with a flip of his wrist, he held the bottle in his hand. Then, he took out a ball of earth essence chi, and poured it into the fish pearls. Receiving the nourishment of the earth essence, all the precious pearls instantly trembled. In a flash, a ray of light shot up into the sky, and blossomed into the sky. In the night sky, it was unusually bright, and could be seen clearly from hundreds of miles away. Zhang Yan smiled, and with a shake of his hand, scattered the precious pearls around the island. Although the light was scattered, it covered a wider area. This appearance was very much like the appearance of a treasure buried deep underground. He was not afraid that the demon toad would not come, and when that time came, he could continue to write. He circled the area again, and wiped away some traces that were too deliberate. Then he returned to the pagoda, ordered the dragon carriage to rise up, and went to wait in the clouds. On the next day, there were a few people who came. These people all had some mana on them, but with one look, it was obvious that they were attached to the pearls with unorthodox techniques. They did not cultivate it themselves but borrowed it from other things, and the owner could take it back at any time. These people stayed on the island for a few days, and after that, more than 100 people came one after another. In total, they picked up no less than 10 fish pearls and returned. Zhang Yan looked at them coldly, and did not go forward to stop them. This was just the bait that he put down. When he returned, the demon toad saw that these fish pearls contained some earth essence. It would not be able to endure it anymore. It would definitely give up everything and come looking for it. At that time, he would be able to fight it out. Chapter 896. In the surging spring continent's peaceful life temple, a man with a sage-like bearing stood under a peach tree, and he held a jade pearl in his hand as he looked at it over and over again. His face was sometimes filled with bewilderment, and sometimes filled with joy. He muttered to himself, "That's strange. Where did the earth spirit chi in the pearl come from? Could it be that the spiritium of the West continent is flourishing again?" However, as soon as the words left his mouth, he laughed and shook his head. In the land of the West continent, there was no doubt that the spiritual opportunity would be restored in the future. However, that would require a long period of accumulation. There was no possibility of it appearing overnight. Otherwise, the cultivators back then would not have needed to find another place to cultivate. Combined with the treasured light that shot into the sky from the southwest 2 days ago, He determined that it was extremely likely that the treasures hidden by these people had emerged into the world before they left for the East. This was not impossible. Back then, the Western continent cultivators had suffered the consequences precisely because they wantonly extracted the earth chi. It was not surprising that one or two such spiritual treasures had been preserved to this day. Thinking of this, his expression became slightly excited. He thought to himself, "This treasure has been hidden underground for tens of thousands of years. It should have accumulated a lot of earth chi. If I can get my hands on it, I won't have to be trapped here anymore." If the earth chi was hidden in the mountains and rivers, as long as it was not completely dispersed by external forces, it would absorb the essence of heaven and earth. Treasures refined with this earth chi, even if they were damaged and not refined, would be restored after a long time. If he could get his hands on it, it would be convenient for him to do things. Although he was able to walk on his own, it was only a borrowed body. His real body was still recuperating deep underground. Back then, during the great battle between human cultivators and heavenly demons, he was confident that he could predict good or bad luck, so he acted in an ostentatious and unbridled manner. He had indeed killed quite a few ancient Qi practitioners. Later, before Tai Ming-Jinren made his move, he first concealed the heavenly secrets, so he was sealed and suppressed in a situation where he was defenseless, unlike Gui Yuanjun, who had made arrangements in advance, and even his natal pearl was taken away. After being imprisoned for more than 10,000 years, even though it had the body of a sky demon and its body had not decayed, its blood essence was almost exhausted. It was impossible for it to control the demon toad's body. As for his soul, it was even worse. At this point, only a strand of it was left. Not to mention the fact that he couldn't use many of his innate divine abilities. Even the ability to distinguish between fortune and misfortune had been lost. Therefore, he planned to first create a treasure to cross the sea and send this body to the East continent. Then, he would try to find blood to feed his body and use the essence condensing pearls that were tens of thousands of years old. He shouted to the outside. He said, "Men!" Immediately, two people who looked like servants trotted in with their bodies lowered. He knelt down from afar. "What instructions do you have, divinity?" The toad demon said, "Tell His Majesty that there is a spiritual creature appearing on the water. Tell him to prepare a boat that can withstand the wind and waves. I'm going out to search." This body had been nourished by his own blood essence for over 100 years. He had already cultivated to the 4th rank of strength path and could already soar through the clouds. However, this magic power was accumulated bit by bit. He did not want to use it unless it was absolutely necessary. The servant said, "May I know when the divinity will depart?" The toad demon said, "The faster the better." After a pause, he added, "That spiritual item might be able to refine the longevity pill. If we're too late, others might beat us to it." The servant kowtowed heavily on the ground and said, "This lowly one will pass down the decree now." The king of the gushing spring continent was already old and frail. When he heard that they were going to search for the longevity pill and that it was related to that spiritual light, he became impatient and immediately passed down the decree, mobilizing several large boats and sending over 1,000 imperial guards to protect them. The toad demon did not refuse. Maybe there were already people from other countries on the island with these guards. They could chase them away. After noon that day, he led everyone to board the boat and sailed southwest. During the day, he relied on his senses to sense the location, while at night, the treasure light guided them, so the direction was the same. After a day and a night, they were already close to the island. However, the closer he got, the more uneasy he felt. In the past, when he predicted that something bad would happen to him, it was the same situation. He frowned and thought, "Strange, could it be that there is something on the island that can hurt me?" He thought about it, and felt that it could be that the spiritual treasure had a true spirit, or a true weapon, which could threaten him. Thinking about this, he was not shocked, but happy. Even if it was a true weapon, a 10,000-year seal, but it did not fly towards his home, then it was very likely that it was in the same predicament as his own. If he could erase the true spirit and snatch it, then it would be enough to break the current situation. As for whether someone set up a trap to ambush him, he did not think too much about it. Because in his mind, if someone had the ability to subdue him, they would have already killed their way to his door. As for the life and death of mortals, those Qi practitioners did not care. When the big boat was only a few miles away from the island, he did not wait for the small boat to be lowered. He leaped into the air, his sleeves fluttered, and he rode on the clouds with the help of the wind. When the people on the boat saw this, they exclaimed, and many servants knelt down and kowtowed to him. Once he reached the island, he went straight to the place where the spiritual vigor was the most abundant. Not long after, he arrived at a small hill, and he circled around it. After carefully sensing it, he noticed that the spiritual energy within was scattered, and there was at most 3 or 4 years of spiritual energy here. He instantly knew that something was wrong. He also made a prompt decision, and without saying a word, he immediately soared up a black smoke, and it surged as he wanted to leave the island. However, at this moment, an extremely majestic manna suddenly pressed down from the sky, and it had already fixed his body in place. Seal the heaven and earth? The toad demon's heart thumped, and he looked up into the sky. A carriage appeared in the clouds, and it was pulled by 2 fierce dragons. On the carriage stood a handsome young Taoist. He wore a black robe and a magic crown, and his robe fluttered with the wind. His entire body was filled with Qi of the Tao, and astral currents revolved around him. His eyelids twitched. This aura was obviously a cultivator that had cultivated a Qi Tao Dharma body, and he was just a step away from stepping into the elephant phase realm. If it was 10,000 years ago, he wouldn't be afraid, but now he had no choice but to admit defeat. He cupped his hands and said in a deep voice, "I don't seem to have any grudges with this Taoist." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "I Qinsong Zhang Yan, I am from the lineage of the great underworld patriarch. Today, I came here especially to settle the 10,000 years of karma with Taoist." During the ancient heaven demon battle, Qinsong hadn't established a sect yet, so the toad demon had never heard of it. However, when the 4 words great underworld patriarch came out, his heart jumped, but he pretended to not understand, and said, "What 10,000 years of karma? I don't understand." Zhang Yan said with a faint smile, "Taoist, why don't you admit it? Even if you wear human skin, you can't hide that heaven demon Qi that can scare dragons." When the toad demon heard this, he was silent for a while, then he said coldly, "I didn't expect that you still came to find me." He raised his head and said, "This Taoist Zhang, can you let me go? I can swear that I will only live in seclusion in the mountains, and will never come into the world to harm people. What do you think?" Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head and said, "This method is not appropriate. This kind of 10,000-year-old demon. He didn't know how many methods he had. An oath could bind others, but it might not be able to bind him." The toad demon stared at him and said, "Then what do you want?" Once he fought with someone, then the little bit of cultivation he had just accumulated would be used up. Even if he won, it would take hundreds or thousands of years to recover. If he could avoid fighting, he would try his best not to. Zhang Yan looked down and said seriously, "I have an order from the sect. Your demon body must be removed, but your soul can be allowed to reincarnate, and I will recommend you to become a disciple of a great master in your next life. What do you think?" The toad demon's face darkened. If it was a normal demon, if it was forced to reincarnate and knew that it could still become a disciple of a big sect in its next life, it wouldn't be so resistant. But he was a heaven demon. How could he be willing to become a human again? He frowned and said calmly, "Taoist, I see that you have reached the 3rd stage of Yuaning. I'm afraid you are already searching for the method to enter the manifestation realm, right? In the past, I have obtained many superior skills. If you don't make things difficult for me, I am willing to give them to you." When Zhang Yan heard this, he only smiled slightly. The toad demon looked at him and nodded. "That's right, you are of the great underworld Doran's lineage. You naturally don't care about other people's Tao skills. How about this? I know the location of several small worlds opened by Qi refiners in the past. I can tell you all of them." Fearing that Zhang Yan didn't know what kind of small worlds they were, he reported the names of the people who opened them one by one, and finally he said, "These are all ownerless lands. Taoists need not be afraid of people investigating." Zhang Yan heard many old stories from the stone statues, and these people's names were mentioned before. All of them were extraordinary, but they were all people who died fighting with heaven demons over 10,000 years ago. However, he was unmoved and only said, "Taoist need not waste your effort. I only saw that you didn't do any evil things after breaking the restriction, and instead, you protected the peace of this place, so I am giving you a chance, don't make a mistake." The toad demon was after all a lord among demons. Just now, it was already not easy for him to compromise. Now that he heard this, he couldn't bear it anymore, and laughed loudly. Then, his expression turned fierce. He originally didn't want to waste his vitality, but since he couldn't persuade him, then he could only fight. His throat moved, and he swallowed a drop of blood essence that he kept in his mouth all year round. In an instant, a ferocious aura spread out, and his cultivation rose sharply, instantly entering the perfection stage of rank 4. His body also grew taller, and in the blink of an eye, he grew to about 300 feet tall. Both his feet stood on the island, and he pressed his abdomen, and opened his mouth towards the sky, shouting loudly. Instantly, a shocking shockwave surged out, like a raging waterfall that flowed against the flow. When it reached the sky, it was like a thick cloud that spread out, and a rotten smell could be smelled inside. Zhang Yan's expression was normal, and he stood in the void without dodging. In the sky behind him, yellow smoke came from all directions, and instantly gathered into a huge hand that was 100 feet tall. When it was condensed to the peak, the hand flipped and slammed down. When the two clashed, an earth-shattering sound resounded in the sky above West Sink Continent. The demon toad saw that the huge hand was destroyed, and he stared at Zhang Yan, and suddenly, a white light shot out from his eyes. Zhang Yan's body still did not move, but a golden leaf flew out, and a golden curtain fell down, blocking in front of him. When the white light collided, it suddenly turned into smoke, and surrounded the leaf, continuously corroding the spiritual qi on it, and obviously had the effect of polluting the magic treasure. At the same time, the toad demon lowered his body slightly, and with a loud roar, he leaped with all his might, and his huge body smashed upwards with a loud bang. He could naturally see that this Taoist was extremely powerful, and his magic treasures were not ordinary. If they continued to fight like this, even if he did not lose on the battlefield, if the battle dragged on for a long time, his magic power would not be enough, and he would definitely lose. Thus, he could only use a strange plan. Right now, if he rushed forward as long as the other party gave way, he could break through the cloud and let the trillions of golden moon bugs down. Then he could delay him and he could die together with him. Even if he gave up this body, he could start over again, but the other party would not have such a chance. Chapter 897. The giant that was hundreds of feet tall suddenly leaped into the sky, bringing along a wave of oppressive and evil wind. The island shook violently, the ground cracked and rocks shattered, almost collapsing. Zhang Yan saw that he was courageous and looked like he was staking it all on one throw. Although he could not guess his true intentions immediately, he was experienced in battles and knew that no matter what his opponent wanted to do, he must not let him do as he wished. He pointed downwards and thunder rumbled in the sky. Hundreds and thousands of 5 elements devil-slaying thunder struck down like a storm. The toad demon saw so many thunder and fire coming towards him and was shocked. He channeled his mana and blew out a wisp of white smoke from his nose, covering his entire body. Not a single bit was left out. As a sky demon, he originally had the pearl of life on him. His body was surrounded by evil spirits and normal techniques would not be able to touch him. But now that he was like a dragon swimming in shallow waters, he could only use his mana as a price to defend. As he charged up, thunder and lightning struck down, tearing a hole in the cloud on his body from time to time. In the blink of an eye, it would be filled up again. His speed was extremely fast. Not long after, he was already in the sky and was not far from the high cloud. Zhang Yan saw this and smiled. He stimulated his mana and the power of the thunder and lightning in his hand multiplied. It pressed down even more fiercely than just now. The atmosphere crackled and the rumbling sound did not stop. In just a moment, more than half of the protective cloud on the toad demon's body was destroyed. He could not even repair it in time. He did not expect Zhang Yan's mana to be so strong. Instantly he panicked. If this continued, it was very likely that his protective cloud would be destroyed before he could break through the high cloud. However, the current situation was very awkward. He was there for half a day. He was in the middle of nowhere to hide and he could not retreat. He could only charge forward. Maybe there would be some hope of defeating the enemy. Thinking about this, he roared and did not hold back anymore. He squeezed out all the mana in his body and turned it into clouds of smoke. He protected his body firmly and did not want to give up. He charged up against the thunder and lightning. Zhang Yan looked on coldly. Seeing that he was about to come up, he ordered the 2 flood dragons who wanted to dodge, crash into him. The 2 flood dragons did not dare to disobey. They roared and stirred up the wind and clouds. He grabbed the pagoda and swooped down. It was true that the other party had the aura of a sky monster. But at the end of the day, it was just a human body that cultivated strength path techniques. In terms of cultivation, they weren't necessarily weak. Monster Toad thought that these chi practitioners were all people who cherished their bodies. If he were to pounce forward with such a suicidal look, the other party would most likely choose to retreat, and he would be able to succeed. But never had he imagined that Qin would actually be so dauntless and actually collide with him without the slightest fear. This caused him to greatly miscalculate. He was resolute and knew that he couldn't do anything, so he snorted and attached his soul onto a golden talisman before flying off with a swish and vanishing without a trace. At the same time, the body collided with the 2 flood dragon chariots. Rumble! The scales in the sky shattered and blood splashed everywhere. The 2 flood dragons' bones and tendons were shattered in this collision, and they fell down in a daze. The demonic toad's incarnation was in an even worse state. In a split second, it shattered. The pagoda was protected by restrictions, so it wasn't damaged at all. However, it was still shaking. Zhang Yan was calm, using his spiritual power to stabilize it. He then reached out and grabbed the cloud's sun gold lock. With just a bit of strength, he pulled the 2 flood dragons back. He looked out and saw that the flesh and blood that were scattered showed no signs of merging back together. It was obvious that he had given up on this body. Just now when the soul left, he sensed it. However, he didn't know what it was using to fly so quickly, such that he couldn't stop it in time. However, he was prepared for it and had made arrangements, so he didn't need to worry too much. At that moment, the 2 flood dragons roared. The broken scales and claws regrew, and in a blink of an eye, they were back to normal. Zhang Yan turned back to the pagoda and sat down. A voice came from inside, "Go to the gushing spring continent." On the other side, the demonic toad was fleeing in panic. His golden talisman was only fast at first, but after 1,000 miles, it gradually slowed down. He said with hatred, "This junior made all my previous efforts go to waste. If I can recover, I will return this humiliation 100 times over." Because he was trapped in the West Continent for a long time, he didn't know if Tai Mingzhenren was still in this world. Therefore, he didn't dare to mention the Qinsong school in fear of being sensed. This person's next step will be to find me in the gushing spring continent. That place is no longer safe. I need to change places. Fortunately, I have made arrangements. He didn't return to his lair, but went in another direction. At the same time, another soul flew out from the gushing spring continent's Ningshou temple. This time, it flew in another direction. He was planning for the worst. These 2 souls went in different directions. Even if one of them was killed, the other one would survive and try to rise again in the future. After flying for a while, he suddenly felt something was wrong. He saw golden-winged insects flying in the air, and they kept coming closer to him. There were more and more of them gathering. At first he didn't care, but now that he saw it, he knew it wasn't an ordinary insect. It was a demon that had cultivated successfully. He was shocked. At this moment, a strange insect with a bloodline behind it flew over. The densely packed eyes on its head were staring at him. It looked like it was about to pounce on him. The demonic toad turned the golden talisman and tried to avoid it. But unknowingly, the sky was filled with such strange insects. They had surrounded him, and he had nowhere to go. He thought to himself, Ever since I escaped, I've never seen any Taoist cultivators or demons here. It must be that Taoist Zhang's doing. I can't fight him head-on, so I need to use words to hold him down, or else I'll really be in trouble. The golden talisman suddenly stopped, and a membrane bulged out. It then turned into a fist-sized jade toad. It opened its mouth and squatted there, saying, "Where did you come from, demon insect? Stop, I have something good for you." When the crimson bug heard this, it stopped moving. Its body shook, and it transformed into a pale-faced youth. "What benefits? Tell me, I'll listen." The demonic toad said, "Although your cultivation is high, you don't have the proper technique. Your foundation is shallow, and the qi in your body is too impure. I have the proper technique. If you don't make things difficult for me, let me go, and I will tell you." Zhang Chan rolled his eyes and said, "Tell me first." The demonic toad sneered in his heart, but he didn't hesitate and said the incantation sentence by sentence. Zhang Chan could not help but be entranced by the story. When the demonic toad got to the end, his tone suddenly changed and he said, "But if you want to cultivate the fruit of Tao with this technique, you still need one thing." Zhang Chan couldn't help but ask, "What item?" The demonic toad's words had a hint of bewitchment, and he said, "That is naturally the heaven demon's blood essence. Like my heaven demon, the qi of the sun and moon is essence, and you are born with endless lifespan. You only cultivated it after birth. If you can get a drop of my blood essence, you can use it to refine the impure qi in your body. You might be able to do so in the future." Zhang Chan smiled sinisterly. "Why go through so much trouble? I know your true body is under the gushing spring continent. After I kill you, I can go get it myself." The demonic toad laughed. "There is only a strand of my soul here. The main soul is still in the body. If you do that, how can I let you have your wish when the time comes?" Zhang Chan also chuckled and said, "You really have your wishful thinking. I want your blood essence, so I have to protect you. But I don't believe that you are the only heaven demon in this world. I will eat you first, and let this young master see what a heaven demon tastes like." When he finished, he called out, and the thousands of golden bugs in the surroundings surged over. This strand of the demonic toad's soul originally didn't have any remarkable abilities, but it was attached to the golden talisman. Seeing that its words didn't have any effect, it immediately turned into a strand of rainbow light and wanted to struggle for the last time. But surrounded by the countless golden bugs, it was like a drop of oil falling into water. After struggling a few times, its treasure light was exhausted, and it could only hide inside and not come out again. But that golden talisman was refined from something, and no matter how it was bitten, it couldn't be damaged at all. Zhang Chan couldn't help but click his tongue in wonder, but he didn't stretch out his hand to touch it, and allowed a little bug to hug it with its claws. This kind of ancient demon, who knew what tricks it had, and he didn't want to fall into any schemes. He shook his body, and transformed back to his original form. He summoned the swarm of bugs, and flew towards the direction of the gushing spring continent. Half a moment later, he saw the dragon carriage in the distant sky, and hurriedly flew over. When he got close, he said proudly, "Master, I acted according to Master's instructions, and indeed, that demonic toad has already captured its soul, and is waiting for Master to deal with it." He waved his hand, and a little bug presented the golden talisman. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You have done a good deed." Heavenly demons didn't have an endless lifespan, and even though their bodies could live forever, their souls weren't like that. Every bit of damage would be used up, so even if it was just a strand of its soul, the demonic toad wouldn't bear to be killed here. If it got rid of it and reincarnated as a human, it would be fine, but if it escaped with the blood essence, the consequences would be hard to predict. The two-headed dragon, however, was a little unconvinced, and thought, if it wasn't for us two brothers working hard, how could this little bug have the chance to take advantage of us? But after what happened last time, they knew that this little bug had made a blood oath with Zhang Yan, and could be counted as a trusted subordinate, not something the two brothers could compare to. So they only muttered a few words in their hearts, but they didn't say it out loud. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, grabbed the golden talisman, and looked at it carefully. Zhang Chan said, "Master, this thing is strange. Just now, I can't hurt it at all. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "It's very likely that this is the primal gold-fixing talisman recorded in the ancient books. When I was talking to fellow Taoist Shi the other day, he also mentioned this thing. It was originally used by the ancient, unorthodox cultivators to hide their souls. Don't look at it. Even if the people from the heavenly abode were to make a move, they wouldn't be able to get it in a hurry." Zhang Chan was shocked and said, "Doesn't that mean we can't do anything to this demon?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This talisman can't be restrained by anything, but it's only afraid of the real fire of Red Sunday. After I use it for a few days, I can gather the fire of heaven fire chi and refine it into real fire." He pinched it with 2 fingers, took out a talisman, and stuck it on it, suppressing it and preventing it from escaping. He threw the talisman into his sleeve, and the next thing he had to do was to go to the gushing spring continent and collect the demon's body. But without the protection of the demon's chi, the gushing spring continent would definitely be flooded, and he had to move it away first. He thought for a while and called the 2 dragons over and said, "Wait for a while, first create some waves, then change into the appearance of the mountain god that the demon toad transformed into, and go to the gushing spring continent to announce that the flood is coming, and then move these mortals to the island that I created that day." The 2 flood dragons immediately accepted the order, removed the golden fetters, and then left with the wind and clouds. Chapter 898. The 2 flood dragons obeyed the order and arrived in the sky above the gushing spring state. The 2 brothers exchanged a few words in the sky and then separated. One of them shook his body and transformed into the appearance of the demon toad, while the other went down to the lake and activated his mana. Not long after, the river below turned around and started to make a ruckus. However, the leading flood dragon looked at it and said unhappily, "Second brother, what are you doing? Did you not eat your fill last time?" The flood dragon below was also depressed. If it was somewhere else, it only needed to stir up the wind and clouds, and any kind of huge wave could be set off. However, the western continent was sparse in spirit vigor. Even though he had increased his supernatural power by several times, it was still not enough. For a moment, he felt that he had lost face. He was also naturally arrogant. He roared angrily and said, "Big brother, just watch." He let out a deafening dragon roar and dived into the depths of the water. The surface of the sea was calm at first, but not long after, there was a faint sound of water gushing. After a while, dark clouds surged in from the sky. The waves of the thousand-instant lake rose up and down, and the waves rolled angrily. The flood dragon in the sky was satisfied. "That's more like it. Brother, hold on here. I'll go greet the people from the gushing spring state." When he finished, he turned around and flew into the state. Although he didn't know the way, he didn't need to guess to know that the place where the king of a country lived was the most prosperous place in the country. Thus, he stared at the flood dragon's eyes and lay on the cloud to discern the aura. Then he found a city in the south. At this moment, the sky was drizzling and the water was misty. There were thousands of palaces and bridges. The bridges were connected to the water and the pavilions were endless. He was in the form of a demon toad now, so he did not avoid anything. He flew into the air and entered the palace wall. He saw that there was a Taoist temple at the top of the mountain, with a small hill to the north, and a star platform was built on top of it. At each of the 4 corners were fully bellied copper toads squatting on guard. Wisps of green smoke floated out from their mouths, sometimes gathering and sometimes gathering. It was a place that was meticulously arranged to nourish spiritual energy. He knew that this was not the work of a mortal. It was most likely the work of the demon toad. Hence, he floated down and landed on the platform. There were hundreds of soldiers guarding the platform. The leader of the military academy sensed the commotion and rushed up to the platform. He recognized the mountain deity and quickly knelt down to pay his respects. He said, "May I know why the great deity is here? Are you going to perform a ritual today?" The flood dragon asked, "Is the king here?" The military academy was startled. He said, "I don't know. Perhaps he is refining his chi in the pill room." The flood dragon sighed and said, "I'm outside the sky. and I've discovered that there's going to be a flood wave coming soon. It's so powerful that it's hard to control it, and it could drown my continent." The military officer was shocked and said, "What should we do now?" The flood dragon said, "I can open the altar and cast a spell." They only resisted slightly because they suspected that there was a demon behind the flood. However, if they fought, they would not be able to fight. "I'm afraid I won't be able to protect all of you. Go and inform the king that we need to find a way to move to another continent to avoid disaster." The demon toad's clone had been in the gushing spring continent for more than 100 years. After 4 dynasties, the fate of this country had never declined. Hence, the king believed his words without a doubt. He couldn't help but be at a loss of what to do. He immediately gathered his officials to discuss the matter of moving. However, the signs of disaster had yet to appear. Not everyone was willing to abandon their families and leave their homes just because of a sentence. Suddenly, there were many voices of doubt. However, after half a day, a never-before-seen storm appeared in the southwest direction. The flood wave was more than 100 feet high. However, it was blocked by a formless manna, which was why it didn't invade the continent. For a moment, everyone was silent. However, there was another problem. There were close to 1 million families in the country, and they couldn't leave just because they wanted to. Even if they abandoned them, they would have to prepare a boat for the officials and nobles. It wouldn't be something that could be done in a short period of time. 10 days to half a month was considered a minimum. The king had no choice but to send someone to seek advice from the star platform. This was exactly what the flood dragon wanted. It was convenient for him to appear in his dreams that night, saying that he would send them to the other continents, and later when the matter was settled, he would move them back here. He ordered everyone to stay at home and close the doors, not to panic. The night passed peacefully, and on the second day, when everyone awoke from their dreams and opened their doors to take a look, they noticed that they were already on another continent. At the same time that they were endlessly surprised, every household erected the mountain god's memorial tablet, praying for blessings. There was no land or farmland in the new continent. Other than storing food, the millions of families could only hunt and fish for a living. They definitely wouldn't be able to last long. Fortunately, Zhang Yan's move was only to prevent the demon toad from retaliating before its death. After this matter was settled, he would naturally move these people back. The flood dragon's spell also consumed most of its mana. After resting for a while, it met up with its younger brother. It turned around and reported to Zhang Yan that the matter was settled. Zhang Yan listened to the process and gave a few words of praise. The 2 flood dragons were also proud of themselves. At this moment, there was no trace of anyone in the continent. He could do whatever he wanted. He rode on the flood dragon carriage and circled around the island. After a while, he confirmed the location of the forbidden land. He then said, "Zhang Chan, follow me inside. The 2 of you guard the outside. Without my permission, don't leave without my permission. If there's anything that comes out, stop it immediately." The 2 flood dragons responded loudly. Zhang Yan waved at Zhang Chan. The latter immediately turned into the original form of the bloodworm and went into his sleeve. Then he used the earth escape technique and went straight down. After about 1,000 feet, he saw an underground river. At the end of the river, there was an echo from the distance. He followed the sound. After a few miles, the front suddenly widened. He had entered into an empty underground space. It was about 100 feet tall and occupied about a mile. Inside, there were hundreds of natural stone pillars. The 2 ends of the pillars were big and the middle was narrow. However, the surroundings were empty. There was nothing out of the ordinary and there was no sign of the demon toad. After muttering to himself for a while, he walked towards the center. Below him, he saw half of a broken monument. The rest of the monument had long since been broken into pieces, forming a low mound. Presumably, it was used to seal the sky demons in the past. There were some indescribable, mysterious pictures on the tablet. They seemed to be related to the stars in the sky. His heart was moved. He wanted to take a look at the technique of the great underworld patriarch. Unfortunately, the spiritual vigor talisman on it had already dissipated. After looking for a while, he did not see any clues. He smiled and did not persist on it. He waved his sleeves and moved the gravel to the side, revealing a hole the size of a fist. A white gas shot out from his eyes and went straight down. After looking at it for a while, he had a clear idea of what was going on. He immediately retracted the light and pointed with his finger. With a rumbling sound, the soil under his feet collapsed, revealing a slope that extended down into a deep cave. No one knew where it led to. With his feet firmly planted on the ground, he strolled forward. In less than 1,000 steps, he saw a large building deep underground. In front of it was a row of jade stairs, and in front of the main hall was a bronze tripod and incense burner. Above the jade plaque, the words, Xianyu Palace, could be vaguely seen. On both sides of the rock walls were cave niches, and there were many statues of deities inside. Each of them had different expressions and looked lifelike. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He did not think that the great underworld patriarch would use his mind power to suppress a demon. If his guess was not wrong, these should have been buried directly into this space from the surface of the earth when the restriction was sealed that day. Therefore, these buildings were very likely the ruins of some Taoist sect in the past. However, the matter at hand was more important. After this was over, he could take a look around and see if there were any remnants of the etched tablets. He stood in front of the temple. This was close to the heart of the sealed demon toad. If there was any trap, it must be here. He had always treated this heavenly demon as a formidable foe and did not underestimate it just because he had easily destroyed its doppelganger earlier. A thought flashed through his mind and he said, Zhang Chan, send the golden bug inside to investigate. As soon as he said this, a golden bug flew out from his sleeve and landed on the ground. It transformed into a pale young man. He bowed and said, Master, please wait. He let out a low whistle and a large swarm of bugs flew out from his body. They crawled up the stairs and rushed into the temple like a tide. These bugs were only connected to Zhang Chan's mind. After a while, he revealed a happy expression and quietly reported a few words. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. His body swayed slightly and disappeared in an instant. When he reappeared, he was already in front of a large stone pit. The pit was surrounded by a pile of soil about 10 feet high. It was half buried and half buried. There was an object inside. The outline of the object was extremely large. Upon closer inspection, it was a jade toad about 10 feet long. It had red eyes and a round mouth. Its limbs were thick and short. There was a short horn on its forehead and there were thousands of bumps on its back. It looked like a bead curtain. If one looked closely, they could see that it had many tightly closed eyes. Although it was only an empty shell, it was crouching on the ground. Its eyes were wide open and it looked like it was alive. Zhang Chan curled his lips and said, Master, is this the thousand-eyed flower toad? It looks normal. It's just that it's a little bigger. Zhang Yan said calmly, This monster is different from the other ferocious beasts. Its ability lies entirely in its 1,000 pairs of eyes. Legend has it that when it fights, it can release thousands of rays of light that can weaken spirits and absorb souls. When it goes out, it can illuminate hundreds of miles of land, and when it comes back, it can be restrained by a hair's breadth. Unless you're in the grotto heaven realm, be it human or demon, human or beast, you'll die upon contact with it. Zhang Chan was speechless and said, It's that powerful? When he fought with others, he mostly relied on the thousands of insects under his command. He was most afraid of such methods. Zhang Yan sensed for a long time but did not notice anything strange. His mind turned. When he arrived here, he thought that there would be a conflict. Therefore he was cautious. He did not expect that there would be no movement even after he found the body. He did not think that everything would be fine after he captured the spirit in the golden talisman. With such a sky demon, it was impossible that it did not leave something behind. It was most likely hiding somewhere else. He praised in his heart. This great demon was decisive. It left as soon as it said it would. It did not even care about its own body. However, even if it escaped with the blood essence, as long as it was still in the West Continent, there was no need to worry about it. The most important thing now was to keep this body. He said in a deep voice, Zhang Chan, I need to use my divine art to convey his words. Retreat outside and protect me. Zhang Chan responded. He immediately called the thousands of golden insects and flew in all directions. With a flick of his finger, Zhang Yan released several formation flags and inserted them around the hole. Then, with a flick of his sleeve, a celestial sound suddenly rang in his ears. A ray of spiritual light flew out like a wisp of smoke and floated into the nose of the monster toad. Chapter 899. Under the corrosion of the 9 subduing magic slip, the demon toad's body was like soft wax, slowly melting away. About 9 days later, it was completely absorbed. Only thousands of smooth pearls were left behind. They fell onto the sand one by one, emitting a faint light. These were all the eyes of the demon toad, and could be considered a rare treasure in the world. Zhang Yan glanced at them, and they all flew out from the ground and slowly floated in front of him. He counted, there were 512 pairs, exactly 1,024 pairs. He circulated his magical power, and after sensing for a while, he could feel a strange spiritual energy hidden within. It was just that at this moment, it seemed to be in a deep sleep, storing and not releasing. It seemed like this treasure was similar to the origin pearl, and it required the heavenly demon's blood essence in order to be of use. But today, other than the few that were sealed in the land of the 9 continents, the sky demons were extinct. Even if he could find the blood essence, it was too extravagant to use it to control these eyes. Thus, he had other ideas. At most, he would spend some effort in the future to open the earthly fire heavenly furnace and refine it into a treasure. Even if its power was slightly weaker, he did not need to rely on the blood essence. With a thought, all the eyes seemed to be summoned, and one by one, they entered his sleeve. After finishing this, he once again turned his attention to the 9 subduing magic slip. After the magic slip had eaten its fill of spiritual essence, it did not fly back like it usually did. Instead, it glowed brilliantly and quietly floated there, motionless. Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. This jade slip was undoubtedly much stronger than before. He still remembered that when he dissolved Gui Zongyao's body, it took a full 18 days and nights. Although the demon toad was suppressed underground for tens of thousands of years, it was still stronger than the black tortoise. But now it took even less time. He did not rush it, but sat cross-legged on the ground and waited quietly. An hour passed in this manner. Suddenly, the jade slip trembled and emitted a loud and clear ring. At the same time, Zhang Yan's sleeve also trembled, as if something was in a hurry to come out. He did not need to check to know what it was. After thinking for a while, he let go of the restraint. In an instant, a spiritual light flew out. There was a rumble. A 10-zhang devil treasury stood steadily in front of him. The jade tablet flew inside and disappeared in a flash. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and pondered for a moment. He fluttered his robes and stood up. He strode in. Fang Yi was inside. He felt as if he had entered another world, and he heard a loud sound that seemed to split the heavens and earth apart, coming from all directions. Suddenly, 12 towering demonic figures appeared. Each of them was shrouded in mist, making it difficult to discern their true appearance. One could only vaguely see their silhouettes. Each of them was ferocious, emitting a monstrous aura from time to time. As for the 9 subjugation demon slip, it floated high up in the sky. He tried to summon it with his mind, but he couldn't summon it back. There was only a divine will that seemed to want him to choose one of the 12 demon forms. Thinking about the devil transformation divine art from before, a layer of enlightenment instantly appeared in his mind, and he looked around. This was the path that he chose in the demon subjugation scroll. What he saw now was probably the demon body that he needed to form when he reached the 5th realm. Now that the 4th realm of the god contract was already at the perfect realm, it seemed like if he wanted to improve further, he had to follow its wishes. His gaze became a little more serene. If it was really as described in the Jade Slip, there were 9 great realms in the Profound Insight method, then it would be a method that led directly to the Great Way. However, the more one cultivated it, the more one would discover the hidden mysteries within. He needed to think carefully about whether or not to choose rashly would cause an unexpected disaster. Although he had refined the demon subjugation scroll long ago and had to follow his wishes, if he resisted, he couldn't do anything about it. However, to be careful, he still needed to be prepared. He thought about it carefully and had an idea. He opened his robe and released Fan Zhen's incarnation from his bag. He then gave an order in his heart for it to choose. The soul on the incarnation came from his body, and as long as he was willing, he would be able to know what it saw and heard. The entire body was refined by that drop of demon blood, so it would be easy for it to accept this technique. If something went wrong, it would just be one less incarnation. The incarnation stepped forward and didn't hesitate much. It stood still under the demon body in the north. The giant body of the demon body suddenly moved and looked down like it was examining him. After a moment, a bright light flew out from its eyes, like a river. It turned into silver stars and entered the incarnation's body. During this process, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Zhang Yan called the incarnation in front of him and pointed at its brow. Everything that the incarnation saw was known to him. In its mind, there was an additional cultivation technique. He looked at it for a long time and then frowned. Is that so? There were no traps on this cultivation technique. Instead, according to what was written, this cultivation technique pointed directly to the Tao. It had the ability to flip the heavens and earth and had endless changes. However, if one wanted to cultivate this cultivation technique to a deep level, one had to abandon oneself and merge with the demon body. Would the body turn into the demon body or merge with the demon? At that time, even if one had great spiritual power, the person who cultivated this cultivation technique wouldn't be the same person as before. Zhang Yan scoffed coldly and said decisively, "This isn't my path." The moment he said that, the entire area started to tremble. He waved his sleeves and left without any reluctance. Behind him, the 12 demon bodies collapsed. The moment he stepped out of the demon treasury, he summoned with his mind. The demon subduing bamboo didn't resist and flew into his sleeves. As for the demon treasury, it shook a few times and turned into a ball of spiritual light. It was also kept in. Although he decided not to cultivate this cultivation technique, be it the demon bamboo or demon treasury, they were all rare treasures and he didn't plan on giving them up. He thought to himself, I was going to try to enter Strength Path Grade 5 while I was suppressing and sealing the beast. Since I can't, then there's no need to think too much about it. I'll just spend all my energy on the Chi path. He made up his mind and didn't think too much about it. He looked at the temple on the platform and with a tap of his feet, wind wrapped around his body as he floated over. This Xianyu Palace should be an ancient sect of West Continent. Since he was already here, he would take the chance to see if there was anything useful for his cultivation. The place where the thousand-eyed monster toad was sealed was between the front hall and the middle hall of the temple. There were many more halls behind it. The middle hall was empty, with only broken pillars and broken walls. He swept his eyes across and headed straight for the back hall. There were 17 halls here. It was huge. One could see that the elders of the sect used to preach scriptures. When he passed by, he entered to take a look. At the start, he didn't find anything, but when he reached the last 2 temples, he found something. There were several skeletons surrounding a few well-preserved Xian steels. However, the strange thing was that most of them weren't in human shape. At a glance, it was obvious that they were birds. Zhang Yan walked a few steps closer and looked at the steels. The inscriptions on the steels didn't use eroded inscriptions. Instead, they were recorded in ancient Chinese. It was said that a cultivator from overseas came to Xinyu Temple and made a bet with the cultivators in the temple to see whose cultivation technique was better. The cultivator from overseas took out an extremely brilliant divine art. In order not to be at a disadvantage, Xinyu Temple also took out their secret divine art. After comparing the two, the cultivator was amazed by this divine art and admitted that he was inferior. However, he wanted to invite the person who learned this art to come out and have a talk. However, what made Xianyu Temple embarrassed was that because of the harsh conditions to cultivate this art, no one had mastered it for thousands of years. They could only summon a few disciples with shallow cultivation to deal with it. The cultivator from overseas was very gentlemanly. He didn't deny it because of this, but he inevitably left in disappointment. Although Xianyu Temple won the battle in the end, everyone in the sect felt upset. Therefore, they carved the process and set up a stele as proof. It was said that any disciple of the younger generation who could cultivate this divine art could become the personal disciple of the sect master. The stele didn't record how to cultivate this divine art, but it explained the general situation. This divine art was called Seven Birds Transformation. They were Heavenly Phoenix Transformation, Azure Luan Transformation, Golden Rock Transformation, Peacock Transformation, Cloud Crane Transformation, Swan Transformation, and Owl Transformation. As long as a cultivator captured these demonic birds and extracted their bones and blood essence, they could start from the owl, swan, cloud crane, and other demonic birds. Step by step, they could finally achieve the body of a heavenly phoenix. Not only that, but they could also freely transform between several types of birds according to the cultivator's will. What was especially amazing was that this art really transformed the physical body and not the appearance. Even these demonic birds' natural divine arts could be the same. The reason why it was difficult for Xianyu Palace cultivators to master this art was because these 7 types of demonic birds were rare in the world. They were too difficult to find. When Zhang Yan saw this, he let out a long laugh. It was really a loss in the east, but gain in the mulberry. His cultivation of the strength Tao could be considered a powerful technique of his own. It would be a pity if he couldn't improve in the future. In his opinion, if there was a need, he could just use the ordinary strength Tao art. This was also the path that most strength Tao cultivators in the world took. Although the remnant spirit contract cultivation method was different, he had the heavenly phase blood essence. With detailed deduction, it might not be impossible. However, this art had a huge drawback. Due to the restriction of the blood essence, even if he returned to the heavenly phase body, he would not be stronger than its original owner. It would be extremely difficult for him to improve in the future. Although this 7 birds transformation did not have a cultivation method, nor did it say where to find it, it pointed out another path for him. Cultivators were not limited to one body. They could transform between many demonic forms. He remembered that among the ferocious beasts sealed by the great underworld patriarch, there was a 10,000-year-old azure dragon. Because it could fight with an ascended perfected being, it was killed early. Back then, Su Yihong could not reach that realm even if he took the body of the snake. However, if he had such a technique, he could first take the body of the snake, then transform it into a flood dragon, and then evolve it into the body of the azure dragon. It seemed to be a feasible path. It was just that it was not easy to deduce such a cultivation technique from beginning to end. However, as long as he knew that it was feasible, he had the remnant jade, the 9 mysterious scriptures, passed down by the great underworld patriarch, and the demonic face cultivation method that also described the Tao of transformation, he might be able to evolve a divine ability in the future. After resolving the doubts in his heart, he bowed to the stone tablet and the surrounding skeletons. He smiled, put his sleeves behind his back, and turned to leave the hall. Chapter 900. Zhang Yan exited Xianyu Palace, called Zhang Chan and flew out from the underground. Once he reached the surface, the 2 flood dragons immediately welcomed him and reported, "Zhenren, just now when the demonic aura dissipated, the surrounding waves gathered and seemed to want to engulf the continent, but the 2 of us blocked it." Zhang Yan looked around and saw the raging waves. He knew that the gushing spring continent's terrain was low, and it relied on the demon toad's original demonic aura for protection. Now that the body was destroyed, there was naturally no way to block it. However, the demon toad was not being kind. He was just afraid that his forbidden land would become a swamp country, and there would be no living creatures for him to use, and it would be hard for him to escape. If it was another land, he would have eaten all the people and beasts in the continent to nourish himself. He praised the 2 brothers and said, "Well done. Although the demon's body has been destroyed by me, I suspect that its spirit has escaped. If it is not eradicated, it will leave a source of trouble. I want to set up a forbidden formation here, 1 to protect the continent, and 2 to guard against this demon. One of you 2 brothers, go and bring the people in the continent back, and the other one will stay here to suppress the waves, so that it will be convenient for me to do things." The 2 flood dragons said in unison, "Yes, master." Zhang Chan was eager to try. "Master, why don't you come down? Do you want me to find that old demon?" Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and said slowly, "There's no hurry. Judging from the spiritual vigor here, this demon can't run far. It won't be too late to catch it after I make the appropriate arrangements." Zhang Chan quickly said, "I will protect you, master." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, and Zhang Chan bowed and gathered his strength to guard the surroundings. Zhang Yan observed the terrain of the gushing spring continent for a while, and thought to himself, "The spiritual spirit here is not prosperous. If I use a normal method to set up the formation, it will be able to withstand the wind and waves, but after tens or hundreds of years, the formation mechanism will probably dissipate under the erosion, and the people in the continent will still suffer a disaster." In fact, it was the simplest to use his previous method of moving the mountains and changing the land. However, in this way, it would ruin the fields and pastures, making it difficult to farm and graze. This went against the original intention. Apart from that, there was another way, which was after setting up the formation. Then he used a magical treasure to suppress it. This would affect the land spirit and protect the formation. However, there were also drawbacks. A spiritual treasure would not be willing to sit here and be trapped. Perhaps it was under Zhang Yan's orders. He did not dare to disobey. But as time went on, they would think of a way to escape, and ordinary magical treasures would not be of much use here. He pondered deeply for a long time. Finally he said, "Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Why don't I pass down a martial art here? Even if they are limited by spiritual opportunity and can't achieve much, they can still return to the prohibition array in the continent guarding formation." Having made up his mind, he lightly flicked his finger, and array flags flew out one after another, transforming into spiritual light that shot straight into the sky. Then, they hung there motionlessly as if they were embedded in the sky. He blew gently, and in an instant, a gust of strong wind flew up like a dragon. With the help of his mana, the array flags shone brightly. Countless talisman Xian characters appeared on the flags, floating and spinning in the sky. They attracted the essence and spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth, and kept gathering inside. After 7 days and nights, Zhang Yan saw that the fire was ready. He pointed again, and thousands of array flags shook at the same time. They fell one after another, arranged according to the position of the array. Some went into the sea, some went deep into the continent, and they spread out, covering tens of thousands of miles in an instant. Seeing that everything was arranged properly, he made a final hand seal, and the entire continent shook slightly. It was as if a layer of mist had been removed, and the mountains and rivers in this place suddenly became a little more spiritual. From this moment onwards, all the spiritual opportunity of the mountains and rivers under the surface of the earth had merged with the prohibition array, and there was no distinction between them. Once the big array was formed, the effect was immediate. The waves that were piling up outside gradually retreated. Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves, leaped into the sky, and said, "All of you come over." The 2 flood dragons and Zhang Chan heard the call, and hurriedly went forward. Zhang Yan explained in detail what he needed to do, and after the 3 listened, they went according to his orders. Zhang Yan raised his head, and the next thing was to deal with the golden talisman. This required him to go beyond the extreme heaven to collect the heavenly yang fire qi to refine it into the true red sun fire. This was easy to do elsewhere, but in this west continent he had to be wary of the golden moonworm. He only needed to adjust his breathing for a moment, and with a soft shout, a conveyance light rose from the ground and rushed into the sky. After a long time, with a rumble, he had already crashed through the high cloud and reached above the extreme heaven. His mana was surging, and the moment he appeared beyond the high heavens, it was like a fire in the night, and instantly attracted a ball of golden cloud that stretched for tens of thousands of miles towards him. If an ordinary cultivator saw such a scene, he would not dare to stay for long. However, there was no fear on his face. He calmly circulated the magical power of the divine contract and released balls of dark clouds and black smoke from all over his body, shielding his body within. Although this technique could not advance to a higher level, the method of absorbing essence was a wonderful technique in the world, and he had no intention of giving it up. Moreover, the foundation was already laid. Unless he started from scratch, it would not be easy to change it. Even if he deduced some kind of supernatural power in the future, he could only use this as a foundation to seek changes, and could not deviate too much. After spreading out the mana, he no longer looked at the sea of worms, and sat cross-legged on the clouds. He took out a silver mirror, and placed it above his head. He circulated his mana and urged it to absorb the yang qi of the scorching sun. After half a day, he retracted his mana. Looking around, the black cloud that was protecting him was not much left under the continuous erosion of the golden moonworms, and he had no intention to compete with them. There were countless of these worms, and they were almost endless. At night, when the moonlight shone on them, they were even more powerful. He kept the silver mirror, and turned into a ray of sword light to escape from the cloud. As soon as the high cloud was broken, the golden moonworms followed behind him, but most of them were blocked by the black smoke that he left behind. Even if a few of them escaped, they were not a threat, and there was no need to pay much attention to them. When he reached the bottom, he randomly found an island to land on, and used his chi to recover his mana. On the second day, he once again went up to the extreme heaven, and it was also dusk when he came down. At this moment, the silver mirror in his hand was extremely hot, and the color of the mirror had already turned red. He calculated a little, and felt that it was enough, so he did not hesitate anymore. He immediately sat down and sacrificed to refine the true red sunfire. This technique was not complicated, and with his cultivation he only needed a night's work to cultivate it. At dawn, he opened his palm, and within his palm, there was a ball of bright light the size of a wine cup. There was a ball of bright light the size of a wine cup suspended in the air. From time to time, it would emit flowing scarlet flames. However, it looked restless and extremely aggressive. It was as if it would explode if it relaxed even a little. He used his mana to slightly suppress the fire element, and then took out the golden talisman. The fire was controlled by him and immediately pounced on it, wrapping it within. The spirit of the demonic cicada instantly felt that something was wrong. It kept begging for mercy. Zhang Yan just ignored it, and after a moment he had refined more than half of the golden talisman. The spirit inside was already on the verge of collapse from the burning of the true fire, and now that it saw that it could no longer hide, it rushed out without caring about anything else. It was thinking of escaping. Zhang Yan smiled. "How can I let you escape?" He moved his spirit. The shadow of a jade scroll appeared between his eyebrows. It released a ray of divine light, and the spirit was sucked up, and then there was a clear sound. It returned to his consciousness. Zhang Yan slowly retracted his transcendence energy and stood up. He asked a Jiao dragon who had been waiting outside, "Is the matter settled?" The flood dragon said, "Perfected one, it is done. The Gushing Spring Kingdom will send hundreds of people to cultivate Xian techniques in a few days." Zhang Yan casually threw down a Taoist book and said, "You can still pretend to be the mountain god and teach this technique to them." When the flood dragon heard this, it revealed a troubled expression and lowered its head, saying, "I am not good at this. I am afraid that I will make a mistake." Although it was following close to Zhang Yan, it was still a monster raised by the Qinsong school, and not a disciple of Zhao Yu sect. He had heard that there was a monster senior who secretly taught techniques, and then his life was taken away. He must have offended some perfected one of the sect's taboo. Although it was fine to follow orders now, when he returned to the sect, there would be no one to protect him, and that would be the case. Zhang Yan looked at it, and how could he not know what it was thinking? He smiled. "Fine, since you are unwilling, I won't make things difficult for you. You can leave." The flood dragon was a little uneasy, and when he went outside his younger brother saw him, and he was very surprised. "Big brother, what happened?" The flood dragon told him the reason, and his younger brother exclaimed, Big brother is muddle-headed. Look at what perfected Zhang is doing. He is obviously trusted by the sect master, and sooner or later he will step into the Grotto Heaven realm and become the master of the Dujin Hall. You are just following orders. Who would make things difficult for you for such a small matter? When the flood dragon heard this, he felt that it made sense and said embarrassedly, "What should I do? Don't tell me I have to go back to receive orders?" His younger brother pondered, "Forget it, looking at the situation, us two brothers are going to follow Perfected One for a long time. Are we afraid that we won't be able to find a chance? We just have to work harder." On the other side, Zhang Yan released the incarnation of Fanzhen, and he pointed at the center of his brows and sent a spirit over, "You will replace me and teach in the continent." The incarnation bowed, "Disciple understands, I will not disgrace the sect." At this moment in his memory, when he was traveling a few years ago, he met a celestial in the mountains and bumped into this teacher, and he was taught a celestial book. Now that his cultivation was successful, he wanted him to go down the mountain to spread the teachings. Zhang Yan nodded, and after the incarnation bowed respectfully, he left. Zhang Yan looked at his back view, and he suddenly thought that there might be another path to achieve strength path, and he thought to himself, "If I use this method, I wonder if it will work." The method of transformation was ultimately just a divine art, and it did not involve cultivation. Just like the Xianyu Palace's 7 birds transformation, it could not increase one's cultivation at all, but after transforming into a heaven demon's body, it forcefully increased one's cultivation. The 7 birds transformation was just a process of enhancing the divine art, returning to the human body, and returning to the original. There were pros and cons to this, and it was just the best choice when there was no future path, but if there was a more suitable method, there was no need to be stubborn about it. After thinking about it, he smiled and temporarily cast aside this thought. He was very clear that the path of strength path was just a method to protect Tao, and the path of Qi was his foundation. Moreover, it involved deducing a cultivation method, and it was not something that could be done overnight. He needed to think about it carefully, and there might be a more suitable path in the future, so there was no hurry to start now. He would only think about other things after suppressing the remaining ferocious creatures. He looked towards the south, and the ferocious creature that was sealed here was called the 3-legged tiger's striped swine. This demon was very ferocious, and when it exhaled, it was like fire, and when it inhaled, it could split mountains. In terms of strength, it was second only to the green jade heavenly centipede Gui Yuan Jun, not to mention the 10,000-year-old azure dragon. However, he did not know that it was like the demon toad, and it had also escaped from the restriction formation. Chapter 901. Inside the Dragon Carriage Pagoda Pavilion, Zhang Yan sat quietly in his room, overlooking the mountains and rivers. He used his heart to sense the various changes in the continent. This was to investigate the flow of the earth veins and see if he could find the traces of the erosion runes left behind by the sages. In the past month, he had gone around the entire West Sink continent. Now, he had a good grasp of the flow of the earth veins. As for the erosion runes hidden in the mountains and rivers, he had some clues about them. His only regret was that most of the inscriptions were incomplete. Moreover, at the critical moment, the inscriptions were always intermittent. It was difficult to fully understand them. Moreover, it wasn't just one area that was like this. Instead, it was the same for all of them. With his attainments in the path of erosion runes, even if he did not understand a thing or two, it was not to the extent that he could not understand them. It was just a guess, and there must be another reason. After thinking about it carefully, he felt that the erosion runes competition might have covered a much larger area than he had previously thought. It might have covered all 3 continents, and if it went further, it might have covered all the islands in the West Sea. But this was just a guess, and it might not be true. If that was the case, he would not be able to find anything by just looking at the West Sink continent. He had to look at all 3 continents in the West Sea before he could come to a conclusion. Thinking about this, he decided to leave for the next continent as soon as possible. At this moment, a golden nematode flew over from afar. As it neared, it landed on the ground and turned into a pale-faced young man. He carefully walked to the bottom of the pagoda, bowed and said, "Master, I have returned." Zhang Yan opened the door and said, "Come in and talk." Zhang Chan entered the pavilion, bowed once more and said, "This lowly one has followed Master's instructions and searched the surrounding 10,000 miles, but I still can't find the hiding place of the demonic toad's divine soul. May I ask Master if this lowly one is able to find it? May I ask, do you want to go out and search?" Zhang Yan said, "The evil toad has lost its body. Even if it could fly 10,000 miles on a talisman, it would not be easy. But this way, it will definitely leave behind some qi, and there will be no trace of it afterwards. It must not have gone far." Zhang Chan whispered, "Master, maybe that demonic toad didn't try to split the spirit?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How can it be so easy? This demon has broken free, but he can't leave. Could it be that he doesn't think that someone will come looking for him again? Even a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows, not to mention a 10,000-year-old demon like him. He will definitely leave a way out for himself. You just need to continue searching." Zhang Chan pondered and said, "Although I have many insect soldiers under me, I have a lot of them. However, there are water bodies all around, so it will be troublesome to find them." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "The place where he is hiding must be a place that can gather vitality. However, the spiritual energy here is weak and there are not many places like this. You don't have to be impatient. If you search them one by one, it won't be difficult to find some clues." Zhang Chan said, "But it will take a long time and I'm afraid it will delay Master's matter." Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves. He said, "It's fine. I'll go to the West Sink continent to take care of that demon swine first. I'll leave the 2 dragons to help you. I'll search slowly with you and we'll plan when I come back." Zhang Chan bowed and agreed. He then puffed out his chest and said, "That demon toad has lost its body, it can't use its supernatural powers. I alone am enough to deal with it. I don't need the help of the 2 brothers." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't be careless. This time, if you can find this monster, you will be able to escape. If you can find this demon this time, I'll give you some benefits." Zhang Chan was overjoyed and said loudly, "I won't let you down." The next day, Zhang Yan left the West Trap continent alone, riding the wind and clouds. He rode the wind and headed towards the West Sink continent in the south. The 3 western continents were less than 10,000 miles apart. To those cultivators who could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground, it was very close. He didn't travel far on the sea before he saw strange black and white stones scattered on the surface of the sea. They looked like chess pieces. After chatting with the stone statues on the way here, he naturally knew that this was the border between the 2 continents, the battlefield. These strange stones weren't formed naturally. They were left behind by the cultivators of the 2 continents when they fought for spiritual items. Now that tens of thousands of years had passed, the sea had turned into mulberry fields. The stones were still the same, but the traces of people were nowhere to be found. This was the border between the 2 continents. After this, he would reach the West Sink continent if he continued forward. He stopped here for a while. After looking around, he continued his journey south. Not long after, he saw steep mountains rising from the sea in the distance. They stood eerily. Clouds and mist shrouded the middle of the mountains. Occasionally, birds would cry and spread their wings, flying between the 2 mountains. The West Sink continent was originally known as the West Source continent. It was rumored that billions of years ago, this continent was loved by the heavens and earth. The continent was rich with spiritual opportunity and nurtured all living things. It was the most spiritual place in the 9 continents in the ancient times. Later on, cultivators of qi established their sects here. The Taoist sects here were the best in the 9 continents. However, when the calamity struck, they suffered the most. Not only did the spiritual opportunity of the continent collapse, half of the continent collapsed and sank to the bottom of the sea. What was seen today was only a part of it. However, it created another strange scene in the West Sink continent. When the stone statue commented on this place, there were 4 sentences. It said, "Thousands of peaks in the forest, wild geese whirl. Half of the mountain collapses and the sky falls. Below the cliff of Tao seeking, the crane is gone. It's hard to become a celestial. After 1,000 miles into the continent, he could see land. However, when he looked over, he realized that it was mostly bare and cold rocks. There were no signs of people. Even the plants and living things only existed in the cracks between the rocks. Zhang Yan could not help but sigh. Although this continent was not far from the West Sink continent, the spiritual opportunity here was much weaker. Some places were even devoid of life. It was obvious that the aftermath of the calamity had not dissipated yet. Thinking back to what the Yuxiao school did, it was no wonder that the Qinsong school did not object to letting the people of the Shenmen go to the small world. It turned out that there was a precedent. If someone in the Donghua continent tried to touch the roots, they would definitely end up like this. At this stage, where would the cultivators go to live? There was no place like Donghua in the 9 continents that could provide for the cultivators of the world. When that time came, they could only pretend to be strong and fight to the death. From his point of view, this was not impossible. Moreover, he had not passed through the 3 calamities. The only way to protect himself was to find the Dharma access as soon as possible and train his cultivation experience and supernatural powers to the point where he could not control them. When he thought of this, his eyes revealed a look of determination. After adjusting his breath in the sky, he headed southwest according to the direction that sect leader Qin had pointed out. On the 5th day, he found the forbidden land in a valley. He pressed down the cloud and looked down from above. What he saw was a huge pit that was more than 1,000 feet wide and bottomless. He stretched out a finger and a talisman floated into the room. However, after looking around, he found that the room was empty. There used to be an underground palace like the Xinyu Palace, but it had long collapsed into rubble. It no longer had any value. He squinted his eyes. As expected, he was too late. The ferocious creature had already escaped. He looked around for a while and thought to himself, looking at the traces of soil and rocks below, this ferocious creature has been gone for at least 100 years. I wonder if it escaped to another continent or is still in the continent. After thinking for a while, he waved his sleeves and flew into the sky again. He then looked around. After a while, he saw a green shadow in the southeast. There was a faint aura of life. There seems to be life there. It's in the southeast. If the demon swine wants to go to another continent, it must pass by. I can go there to investigate. He summoned his will, and a sword light flew out, wrapped around him, and turned into a rainbow as it flew away. An hour later, he saw a wisp of smoke in the sky. He knew that there were traces of people here. The 3-legged demon swine was huge. After escaping, it definitely couldn't transform into a human. If it had been here before, there should be some clues. Not far away, he suddenly felt his body warm up. It wasn't as cold as other places. He sensed carefully and realized that it was only limited to these 1,000 or so regions. This abnormality attracted his attention and he stopped. He glanced over and was slightly shocked. In the forest below, there was a flat open space. There was an altar built in it. It was 20 feet tall and had a strict layout. It was obvious that it was used to gather qi. Could it be that there are also cultivators here? Or is it the work of the demon swine? Just as he was guessing, he saw hundreds of people coming out of the forest. They carried animals like dogs, horses, cows, and sheep to the altar. They then knelt and kowtowed. Following that, under the instructions of an old man with a strong body and a full beard, they placed them one by one. However, there was no officiator on the altar. There weren't any rituals or rules. Looking at everyone's expression, they all had a look of fear. After putting down the cows and sheep, everyone retreated in a panic. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and descended from the clouds, but no one noticed him. He arrived in front of the old man, cupped his fists, and said, "Sir, may I know what you are worshipping?" The old man didn't know when a stranger had appeared beside him. He was shocked and sized him up. He cupped his hands and asked cautiously, "Sir, are you the celestial master of Firestorm Ridge?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'm not from Firestorm Ridge. I came from the north and traveled all the way here. I came across everyone worshipping an empty altar, so I came up to ask." The old man exclaimed, "Celestial Master came from the north. You must be very capable." He paused and said, "Celestial Master is an outsider. No wonder you don't know this place." He pointed to a mountain in the distance that looked like a sharp awl. "This place is called Jimuyuan. About 100 years ago, a great god fell into the mortal world and happened to land here. Rumor has it that this god was wronged by the heavenly court. He roared at the sky all day long, his voice shaking thousands of miles. He also breathed fire, wind, and fog. There was a saying that smoke and dust covered the sun, and no light could be seen for 3 months. But this ruined our livelihood. Later, we begged a few celestial masters to come up the mountain and offered hundreds of young boys and girls. Finally, we made an agreement with the great god to build a temple at the foot of the mountain and offer offerings on this day every year. Only then did the mountain god's anger be suppressed. But in the past few decades, there were still some troubles from time to time. It's only in recent years that things have gotten better." After listening, Zhang Yan immediately knew that the so-called fire god was most likely the demon swine. This demon was different from the thousand-eyed toad. Although its life pearl was also taken, it had the ability to use the astral wind and earth fire to cultivate its true essence. Otherwise, it wouldn't have escaped with its body. And the situation here was most likely caused by stealing the earth fire and piercing the earth aperture. Maybe at this moment, it was hiding somewhere under his feet. Chapter 902. After Zhang Yan chatted with the old man, he understood the situation. He separated from the rest and flew up into the sky, heading towards the wind and fire ridge. The offerings of mortals were useless to sky demons, but cultivators who had just started cultivating qi needed this to replenish their qi. Those celestial masters on the ridge were very suspicious. Maybe they were like the demon toad, purposely made up by the three-legged swine. The ridge was not far from the altar. He arrived in a short while. Looking down from a high place, he saw that the mountain was barren, there was no vegetation, no beasts or birds, it was all jagged rocks, like a land of death. There was only a temple built with large rocks standing at the waist of the mountain. It was very easy to recognize. There were no formations protecting it. The plaque in front of the temple was broken, the words were long blurred, the entrance was overgrown with weeds, like no one had taken care of it for a long time. After watching for a while, he descended and strode into the temple. Just as he entered, he felt a wave of heat coming at him, like he had fallen into a furnace. His eyes flashed. With his cultivation and mana, he still felt this way. People with weaker mana would not be able to last long in this place. He looked straight ahead, passing through the front door. In less than 20 steps, he arrived at the main hall. He raised his head to take a look and saw that inside the shrine there was a statue of a deity howling towards the sky, with a long trident in both hands. It looked like it was dancing angrily. The sculpture was originally very majestic and imposing, but now it was covered with dust and grime, and most of its golden armor had fallen off, making it look shabby and shabby. The candles on the offering table had long been empty, and a thick layer of soot had accumulated in the incense burner. Zhang Yan could see that this place should have been abandoned long ago. He looked left and right but did not find anything. He went around the statue and went straight to the back hall. That was the source of the heat. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the bottom of the mountain. Below him was a several dozen zhang-wide sinkhole. A gust of hot air gushed out from the sinkhole, and a scarlet light shone up, illuminating the walls red. It was like he was inside a furnace. He tried to sense it. He did not detect any energy movement. After thinking for a while, he tapped his feet and floated down. The deeper he went, the stronger the heat wave. In the end, his eyes were filled with red light. However, his expression did not change. After descending for about 3,000 feet, he finally reached the bottom of the pit. This situation was even stranger. There were more than 10 dried corpses sitting cross-legged on praying mats. Their clothes had long since decayed, and the face of the corpse in the middle looked as if it was still alive, as if it had just fallen asleep. In its hand was a jade slip that was as bright as new. Zhang Yan glanced at it. The jade slip flew up and stopped in front of him. Holding it in his hand, his spiritual sense surged into it and he instantly saw through it. This was an extremely shallow cultivation method, and it was somewhat similar to the essence qi that the demons used before they took human form. He snorted coldly. With just a glance, one could tell that this kind of cultivation method was created by a demonic cultivator. Moreover, the demonic cultivators in this world were not the direct descendants of the 8 tribes. Even if they passed down their cultivation methods, they would mostly focus on the path of strength. From this, it could be seen that the person in charge of this place was definitely related to that ferocious creature. However, he didn't know how the demon was doing. Since it was here, it should have already sensed something, but it didn't have any reaction at all. He thought for a while and vaguely guessed a possibility. He threw the jade slip away and continued to walk deeper into the pit. After walking for another mile, after turning a corner, his eyes unconsciously focused. Not far in front of him, there was a ferocious creature lying at the bottom of the pit. From head to tail, it was about 300 feet in size. Its nose and ears were wide open, its fangs were exposed, and it had black sideburns on its back. Under its abdomen, it had 3 legs, 1 in the front and 2 at the back. The front leg was like a short, curled up, and the back leg was as thick as a pillar. Its body was surrounded by a layer of scarlet fire, as if it was wearing a red robe. The heat in the mountain was emitted from its body. However, this great demon's eyes were closed, and there was no sign of life. It was obvious that it had been dead for a long time. Before Zhang Yan came here, he had expected many situations. He thought that it would be another fierce battle, but he didn't expect this result. It was a little unexpected. After looking for a while, he walked closer and examined it again. Suddenly his eyes flashed, and he reached out to grab it. When he took it back, there was an extra item in his palm. He opened it and saw that it was a vermilion pearl. It could be seen that it was originally a treasure, but it had lost its spirit. He said calmly, "So it's the Huiyue pill." With a light pinch, the item turned into dust in his hand, and a small amount of it leaked out from the gaps of his fingers. At first, he didn't understand. After all, it was a sky demon. Even if it was in dire straits, as long as it kept its blood essence and soul, it would definitely not die. However, seeing this item, he immediately understood and more or less guessed the whole story. This big swine was suppressed for more than 10,000 years. When it finally escaped, it was like the demon swine, extremely weak. It was probably afraid that someone would come to capture it again, so it used its strength to escape from the forbidden land. When it escaped here, it should have used up the last bit of yuan qi. It must have felt that the earth fire here was strong, so it wanted to open its earth aperture and absorb the earth fire to nourish itself. However, man proposes, God disposes. Someone planted a Huiyue pill here many years ago. This pill was also a rare item. When cultivators refined their treasures, they mostly opened up the earth fire heavenly furnace. However, if they traveled outside, it was often inconvenient to use it. However, this treasure pill was different. This pill could be thrown into the ground to absorb fire qi when it was free. When traveling outside, it could be carried by one side. When it was inconvenient, it could be taken out and used as the heavenly furnace. After the disaster of the western sunken continent, the mountains and rivers collapsed, and the land spirit was cut off. It was unknown whether the owner of this treasure pill forgot or an accident happened, but it was not taken away and was left here. Although this kind of treasure could absorb fire, there was a limit. After it was full, it naturally could not be contained, and it would inevitably spread out. When the demon swine passed by and felt the heat, it might have mistakenly thought that this was the place where the earth fire ran, so it stopped. If it had obtained this fire bead when it was complete, it might have been able to use it to recover some of its strength. Unfortunately, after 10,000 years, even if it had some fire qi, it had mostly dissipated. If it was absorbed again, it would probably disappear in an instant. And the demon swine did not need its life origin bead to absorb fire qi, but it needed its own essence, blood and soul. It must have used up its last bit of yuan qi, but by the time it realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Once the demon died, the fire on its body naturally spread out. How could the cultivators on the Wind and Fire Ridge withstand it? They immediately died on the spot. Zhang Yan sighed. In the end, divine arts are no match for fate. No matter how strong you are, you can't escape from the unfathomable might of heaven. He shook his head and summoned the demon-subduing slip. A bright light flew out from between his brows and pounced on the body of the fierce beast, penetrating it like a phantom. He went to the side and sat down to wait quietly. After about 2 days, the body of the sky demon was completely transformed into essence and absorbed into the slip. Only a shriveled skin that was emitting blazing scarlet flames was still on the ground. He raised his sleeve and took it into his hand. When he touched it, he did not feel any heat at all. Instead, he felt waves of coolness. This item was called the vermilion robe. If the demon swine was still alive, it could be made into a precious robe and worn on the body. It could avoid all the fires in the world. In the past, countless brilliant cultivators fought with this great demon for this, but no one was able to do as they wished. Later on, although the great underworld patriarch suppressed it, he thought that his cultivation was profound and did not care about such an item. Now, although it had fallen into his hands, it was not a joke after 10,000 years, and he did not know how much of its effect was left. He thought for a moment, shook his sleeve lightly and put it away. Right at this moment, he suddenly heard an unusual sound by his ear, and it seemed to be coming from extremely far away. He frowned slightly and flew up into the sky. In a flash, he came out of the pit and stood in midair while his gaze shot towards the source of the sound. He saw that there were undercurrents surging outside the continent, and the waves shook the heavens as if monstrous waves were brewing. He looked at it for a moment and pondered, so that's how it is. This demon swine's body here has unintentionally suppressed the spiritual vigor of the land, thus there are fewer tsunamis and landslides. Now that I've dissolved its body, there are no more barriers. Fine, I'll do what I did in the West sinking continent that day again, so that it has a way to avoid disaster. He did what he thought and immediately sat down. After a few days, he refined another drop of demon blood and used the mortal truth technique to refine another incarnation. The last incarnation was a middle-aged Taoist, but this time, it was a handsome young man. He sat down and bowed, "Celestial Master, I will leave now." With that, he straightened up and went down the mountain. Zhang Yan thought, I did not waste much time in the central West sinking continent. Why don't I go to the West Jew continent? If I can finish off the demons in that continent, I can first settle my Tao heart and observe the inscriptions here. With his mind made up, he did not hesitate. The rainbow light on his body grew longer, and a streak of light could be seen in the sky as he headed straight for the West Jew continent. After a day and a night, he crossed the sea and land and arrived at the West Jew continent. The continent was long and narrow. As far as the eye could see, one could see an endless mountain ridge that stretched from the north to the south, cutting through the continent. This was the image of a coiling dragon. Among the 9 continents, the land veins here were the clearest. From the sky, it looked like a living dragon was sleeping underground. However, after the calamity, the head fell off, the tail was broken, and the spine was broken. A good earth dragon was destroyed. Although the other 2 continents had suffered from the calamity, they had been struggling at death's door for dozens of years before completely losing their spiritual vigor. However, this continent had become a land of death in just a few months after the earth veins were broken. When the stone statue talked about this continent, it left behind 4 sentences. The dragon's head drinks the blue waves in the north, the dragon's tail plays with the cold mountains in the south. When the universe moves, the wind and clouds change, the merciless heavenly Tao is mysterious. Zhang Yan flew along the mountain range for a day and arrived at the place where Grandmaster Tai Ming sealed the demon. It happened to be a large gap on the back of the earth dragon. This heavenly demon was called White-Headed Fangyo. It was the most mysterious among the 6 beasts, and was rumored to have come from beyond the heavens. Even when the ancient cultivators fought with the heavenly demon, it rarely appeared and did not use any powerful divine abilities. But since it was sealed here by Grandmaster Tai Ming, It was not easy to deal with. He had always been cautious and was not in a hurry to descend. After observing for a long time in the sky, he used his mana to protect himself and walked into the Rift Valley. Chapter 903. Zhang Yan turned into a ray of light and flew to the bottom of the valley. After a few breaths, he arrived at the bottom. At this moment, there was a deep pit in front of him. From the sand on the outside of the pit, he could tell that it was made from the inside out. His expression did not change. The spiritual vigor of the 3 Western continents was not flourishing. The time to restrain the sky demon was even shorter than he had imagined. Since the first 2 sky demons had escaped before he arrived, then it was expected that this one could escape the restriction. But there seemed to be something strange about the surroundings. He could not sense the specific situation below. After careful observation, he saw that there were many colorful stones around. He immediately understood. This stone was called the ingenious embroidery stone. If a cultivator used this to build an altar, it would be twice the result with half the effort. However, the stones in front of him weren't naturally formed. Instead, they were moved here by someone. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what the fierce demon was doing. He pondered for a while and decided to explore. He waved his sleeves and floated in. The bottom of the pit was deep and dark. The bottom could not be seen. There seemed to be an unknown spiritual vigor circling around it. Even with his mana, he could only see 100 feet ahead. As he descended, there were occasional pebbles falling. After a long time, there was an echo of emptiness. The further he went down, the narrower the path. After about a quarter of an hour, he finally reached the ground. At this moment, he saw 2 tunnels in front of him. In the middle, there was a big stone with words written on it. If a guest from afar is here, please take the left path. Zhang Yan thought for a while. This demon must have expected that someone would come to capture it, so it left it behind. This demon was not ordinary. Other sky demons were extremely afraid of being sealed again. They wanted to erase all traces of their family, but it did not seem to be afraid of people knowing. Zhang Yan wanted to see exactly what kind of arrangements this Feigno had made to actually have such confidence. He smiled and walked to the left as he was told. When he reached the tunnel, he suddenly felt a stuffy feeling. It was different from the fire on the demon swine. It was extremely dry and hot. It was extremely dry and unbearable. Deep in his heart, there was an inexplicable irritation. He activated his Xian Qi and his mind became clear. At the same time, he was a little surprised. This white-headed raging bull was quite powerful. It can cause epidemics and droughts. Everywhere it passed, water and trees withered, and humans and animals died. Now that he could sense it, could it be that it was still here? His eyes flashed, but his feet didn't stop. He traveled along the winding tunnel for 4 to 5 miles. When he reached the end, he turned around and entered a cave. He saw a ball of gentle light in front of him, like a warm jade or a warm sun. When he got closer to take a look, he saw that there was a large boulder there, and on top of it was a white-headed bull. It had a single eye on its face, and its tail was like a long snake. Its entire body was like a crystalline glazed jade, and it shone brightly. At this moment, it seemed to be sleeping soundly. Zhang Yan took a few glances and confirmed that there was no soul attached to the body at all. It was just an empty shell. He raised his eyebrows. Could it be that this raging bull was so decisive, abandoning its body here and only taking off its soul? At this moment, his gaze turned and was attracted by a stone tablet at the side. He took a few steps forward and saw a line of words left on it. It said, "My body is here. If any junior wants it, just take it. Remember to owe me a favor. If you don't fulfill it, I will personally come from beyond the heavens to ask for it." He thought about it. Listening to the tone of the words, it seemed like it didn't care about the body. However, since this demon came from beyond the heavens, it wasn't surprising that it had such methods. Of course, it could have purposely played tricks, and the soul went to hide somewhere else. If he wanted to find it, it wouldn't be that easy. No matter what, he had to keep this body first. Even if this demon could cultivate and return, It would take at least tens of thousands of years. As for the so-called cause and effect, he laughed coldly and didn't care about it at all. Back then, this bull was suppressed by the great underworld ancestor, and it wasn't that it was willing to be restrained here. Now, it made it sound like it was taking care of a junior. He was originally here on orders to get rid of future troubles. Even if he was really implicated, the first one would fall on the great underworld ancestor. If this demon was still here, he would ask, "Do you dare to ask for it back?" He shook his sleeves and took out the demon-subduing slip. After the slip swallowed 2 heaven demon bodies, the light on the slip became brighter. After circling around the bull for a while, it suddenly turned into light and shone down, covering it. Zhang Yan waited at the side for 3 days before the light slowly dissipated. When it reformed into the shape of the demon-subduing slip, it let out a clear cry and flew back. He lifted his sleeves and let it fall in. At this moment, on the ground, there was only a pile of snow-like jade shards and 2 gray-black horns. He knew that they were good items, so he kept them. He looked around a few more times, and seeing that there were no more abnormalities in the cave, he used his spiritual power and turned into a streak of light, heading back the way he came. Now that this demon had been taken away, there was only one sky demon left among the 6 great ferocious beasts, apart from the missing 10,000-year-old azure dragon. It was the son of the azure dragon and a female flood dragon. It was a green-scaled flood dragon. However, because its father was captured and killed by the great underworld ancestor, it stirred up trouble out of anger and was sealed. As a result, it was the weakest of the 6. The place it was sealed was in the East Lai continent. He had already made up his mind. After he finished reading the West Lai continent's inscriptions, he would go there. His return journey was very fast. 5 days later, he arrived at the inner world of the West Fall continent. He stood in the sky and threw out a token. He used his mana to guide it, and after a while, he heard the roars of dragons. 2 dragons pulled the carriage from the clouds. A ray of golden light flew out from the carriage and shook for a moment before Zhang Chan appeared. He came up and clasped his hands. He was pleasantly surprised and said, "Master has returned?" Zhang Yan nodded. It had only been a month since he left, which was much shorter than he had expected. This was a good thing because he would have more time to study the West Lai continent's inscriptions. He asked, "Did you notice anything during the time I was gone?" Zhang Chan quickly replied, "Master, I searched a lot of places but couldn't find any trace of the toad. I only found a cave in the southwest that seems to be left behind by the ancient Taoist sect. However, I don't know what the cave was made of, but it was very sturdy. I couldn't enter no matter how hard I tried, and I don't know if the demon is hiding inside." At this point, one of the flood dragons interrupted, "Zhang Chan isn't lying. I also tried. The stone is extremely hard. Even if the old demon isn't inside, there must be some treasure hidden inside." Zhang Yan knew that there were many caves left behind by ancient sects in the West continent, so it wasn't strange to find some. This kind of cave could also be the hiding place of the demon swine, so he couldn't ignore it. He said, "You go there and keep an eye on it. I'll go check it out myself tomorrow. If the demon is really hiding there, I'll remember that it's your credit." Zhang Chan responded loudly and then left excitedly. The 2 W's looked at each other and came over as well. They said with saliva on their faces, "Perfected one, Zhang Chan's insects really can't walk underwater. We brothers also contributed a lot in finding that underwater abode." Zhang Yan smiled and threw 2 bottles of pills to the 2 flood dragons as a reward for their hard work. The 2 flood dragons accepted it with joy. They were willing to stay by Zhang Yan's side. First, they were optimistic about his future. Second, he was the disciple of Danding Courtyard's Zhou Chongju. They could get whatever pills they couldn't get their hands on. By following him, they could always get some benefits. On the second day, Zhang Yan followed Zhang Chan's directions and rode the flood dragon carriage to the water area. After traveling for about 200 li, Zhang Chan pointed at an island below and said, "Master, that immortal's cave is about 150 zhang underwater. I've placed 3 white stones outside the door, so it won't be difficult to identify it." Zhang Yan looked at the surrounding terrain and found that this place was very close to the gushing spring continent. There were several islands with lush greenery around it. Mist and clouds floated in the air. The water was cold and the sky was high. The spiritual essence was also slightly more abundant than elsewhere. No matter how he looked at it, it was a good place to hide. He said, "You wait here. I'll go down and take a look." After saying that, he turned into a wisp of green smoke and used the water escape technique to dive down. Today, most of the islands on the water were dangerous mountains that stood at the top of the clouds in the past. This place was no exception. Walking along the mountain ridge, he soon arrived at the place Zhang Chan mentioned. Sure enough, he saw a cave. The cave door was about 10 feet tall. On the door, there was a pair of black carps connected head to tail. Apart from that, there was nothing else. He reached out and knocked on it. He thought to himself, so it's the green cupstone. Looking at it, the entire cave is built with this kind of stone. No wonder Zhang Chan couldn't open it. In ancient times, many unorthodox cultivators practiced the method of primordial spirit projection. This green cupstone was used to store the body. Not to mention that it was extremely sturdy. There might even be a prohibition talisman carved inside. Without powerful means, it was extremely difficult to open it. However, this kind of sturdy stone could not prevent people with strong mana from peeping with their dharma eyes. Naturally, it could not prevent the spirit from entering and exiting. Zhang Yan used his power with his eyes. He turned into a ray of light and looked inside. In an instant, he could see the scenery inside clearly. It was a stone room that was about 10 feet in size. There were about 10 big jars with milky white wine inside. It was actually a cultivator's wine storage place. Apart from that, there was nothing unusual. He pondered for a moment. He went up and returned to the surface of the water. Then he called the double dragons and Zhang Chan to him and asked, "Not to mention that this place is secretive, there is no flow of spiritual opportunity. How did you guys find it?" Zhang Chan said, "That day, one of my insect soldiers noticed that there was a pearl light coming from the water, so I followed it, but I couldn't find the source. I was afraid that it was the evil toad, so I personally came here to search, and only then did I find this cave." Zhang Yan listened and was deep in thought. Zhang Chan asked carefully, "Master, did you find any traces?" Zhang Yan shook his head slightly. Zhang Chan looked disappointed and said, "So it's not here." Zhang Yan smiled and said meaningfully, "You guys don't have to be discouraged. Come back here in a few days. Maybe you'll find something." Zhang Chan widened his eyes and said, "Master, you mean?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Don't ask too much. Whether it's true or not, you'll know in a few days." After that, he sat on the dragon carriage and instructed. The two dragons shook their bodies and pulled the carriage. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the clouds. Floating Astronomy. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.